Tonight we begin a slow and unhurried journey toward one of the most remote and least understood environments on our planet. A place so deep and isolated that only a handful of human beings have ever seen it directly, and where the conditions are so extreme that for centuries it seemed impossible that any form of life could survive there. Far beneath the surface of the Pacific Ocean lies the Mariana Trench, a vast and silent depression in the Earth's crust that reaches nearly 11 kilometers below sea level. Descending farther than Mount Everest rises into the sky and forming the deepest natural location known anywhere on Earth. Although satellites have mapped distant planets and telescopes have revealed galaxies billions of light years away, the depths of our own oceans remain largely unexplored. And even today, scientists estimate that only a tiny fraction of the deep sea floor has ever been carefully studied. The Mariana Trench represents the most extreme example of this hidden world, a place where sunlight never reaches, where temperatures remain only a few degrees above freezing, and where the pressure of the overlying water becomes so immense that it exceeds 1,000 times the pressure experienced at the surface of the Earth. Our journey begins quietly at the surface of the Pacific Ocean, where gentle waves move slowly across the water under the open sky, and where nothing in the peaceful movement of the sea reveals the enormous abyss that lies far below. Somewhere east of the Philippines and south of Japan, near the island of Guam, the ocean floor bends downward along a narrow arc that stretches for more than 2,500 kilometers, near forming a deep geological scar created by the slow but relentless movement of the Earth's tectonic plates. From the perspective of a ship floating at the surface, the ocean appears uniform and endless. Yet beneath the hull, the water extends downward for distances so vast that the human imagination struggles to grasp them, and even the deepest mountain valleys on land seem small by comparison. If the highest mountain on Earth were placed carefully within the Mariana Trench, its summit would still remain submerged beneath more than 2,000 meters of water, a comparison that illustrates just how profound this underwater landscape truly is. As we begin to descend into the ocean, the water around us remains bright and filled with life, illuminated by the full intensity of sunlight that penetrates easily into the upper layers of the sea, where microscopic plants drift through the currents and form the foundation of an enormous food web that supports fish, marine mammals, and countless other organisms. This upper region of the ocean, known as the epipelagic zone, extends downward for roughly 200 meters, and it is here that photosynthesis occurs as phytoplankton converts sunlight into energy, producing a significant portion of the oxygen that circulates through the Earth's atmosphere. At first, the descent feels gentle and almost peaceful, but as we move steadily downward, the character of the ocean begins to change in subtle and gradual ways, and the bright clarity of the surface waters slowly gives way to dimmer and colder surroundings. The intensity of sunlight diminishes with depth as water absorbs and scatters the incoming rays, causing colors to disappear one by one until eventually only faint shades of blue remain visible in the fading light. By the time we pass 200 meters below the surface, the ocean has entered a region often referred to as the twilight zone, a place where sunlight still exists but no longer provides enough energy to sustain plant life, and where the environment becomes quieter and more mysterious as fewer animals move through the dim water. Temperatures begin to fall steadily, often dropping to only a few degrees above freezing. Yet while the pressure increases continuously, as the immense weight of the ocean accumulates above us. For every 10 meters of descent, the pressure increases by roughly 1 additional atmosphere, meaning that at a depth of 1,000 meters, the surrounding water presses inward with a force 100 times greater than the pressure experienced at sea level, a level of compression that would be instantly fatal to any unprotected human being. Yet despite these extreme conditions, many forms of marine life continue to survive, evolving specialized adaptations that allow them to endure the cold, the darkness, and the crushing pressure of the deep ocean. As the descent continues beyond 1,000 meters, the last traces of sunlight disappear entirely, and the ocean enters a state of permanent night, a vast region known as the bathypelagic zone where darkness is complete and where the only visible light comes from the living organisms themselves. Many deep-sea creatures produce their own faint illumination through chemical reactions within their bodies, creating small flashes and drifting points of light that appear and vanish slowly in the distance, like distant stars suspended in a black and silent sky. And still we continue downward, passing through regions of the ocean that few human beings have ever witnessed, moving slowly toward depths where the pressure grows so immense that even the strongest materials must be carefully engineered to survive, and where the environment becomes increasingly isolated from the familiar world above. Thousands of meters remain below us, and somewhere in that vast darkness lies the deepest known point on Earth, a place called Challenger Deep, where the seafloor reaches its greatest depth and where the conditions become more extreme than anywhere else in the global ocean. The Mariana Trench is not simply a deep hole in the ocean floor, but the result of geological forces that have been shaping the Earth for tens of millions of years. And understanding how this immense structure formed requires looking far beyond the ocean itself to the slow movement of the planet's tectonic plates, which continue to shift and interact beneath the surface even today. Tonight, let's travel somewhere that feels almost impossible to picture, not because it is imaginary, but because it is so profoundly real that the mind resists it at first, as if reality itself has stretched beyond the scale that human intuition was built to handle. We are going to the deepest place on Earth, a place hidden under kilometers of water where darkness never lifts, where cold holds steady year after year, and where the pressure is so immense that even steel and glass must be shaped carefully just to survive a few hours. This is the Mariana Trench, a narrow, curving scar in the western Pacific Ocean, and if you let this journey unfold slowly without rushing, it can feel like stepping into a quiet, ancient secret that the planet has been keeping from us since long before humans existed. If you're listening to this late at night, or in the soft hours just before morning, then you don't need to do anything except settle into the rhythm of the story. Let your breathing remain easy, your shoulders loose, your attention drifting the way a small leaf drifts on calm water, because there is no urgent moment here, no sudden shock that interrupts the flow. Instead, there is only a long descent, steady and patient, into a world that has been present all along, beneath the surface of the sea, waiting without expectation to be witnessed. Up at the surface, the Pacific Ocean looks almost ordinary, and that ordinariness is part of what makes the Mariana Trench so haunting, because there is nothing in the gentle movement of waves that tells you what lies below. The Pacific is the largest ocean on Earth, covering a vast portion of the planet's surface, stretching between continents like an enormous breathing space of water and weather, and somewhere within that immense blue expanse, east of the Philippines and south of Japan, near the Mariana Islands and Guam, the seafloor bends downward into a trench so deep that the highest mountain on Earth could be lowered into it and still not reach the surface again. The comparison is famous because it is simple, but it remains startling every time you truly think it through. If Mount Everest were placed in the Mariana Trench, its summit would still be submerged under more than 2 kilometers of seawater, as if the planet were calmly demonstrating just how little our everyday perspective reveals. The Mariana Trench is not one single hole, but a long arc-shaped depression, more than 2,000 kilometers in length, formed by forces that operate so slowly they can be mistaken for stillness, yet so persistently that they reshape continents and oceans over geological time. What we call the deepest point is a region within it known as Challenger Deep, named after the 19th century expedition that first measured extraordinary depths here. And although the exact number you see in different sources can vary slightly depending on methods and reference models, the order of magnitude is what matters for the feeling of the place. Roughly 11 kilometers down into a realm where the ocean becomes an entire vertical universe, layered into zones that change as dramatically as biomes on land. We begin our descent at the surface, where sunlight pours into the water and the ocean feels alive in the way people usually imagine it, bright and moving, filled with the kind of life that makes the sea familiar. This upper layer is called the epipelagic zone, extending from the surface to about 200 meters, and it is the part of the ocean where photosynthesis can occur, where microscopic drifting organisms known as phytoplankton capture sunlight and form the foundation for food webs that scale up into fish, seals, whales, and seabirds. It is also one of the reasons the ocean matters to the air you breathe, because phytoplankton are part of the planet's oxygen cycle, and the surface ocean is not just scenery. It is a living engine that participates in the chemistry of the atmosphere. At first, descending through this zone is like moving through a cathedral of light, with sunbeams forming soft, shifting columns and tiny particles drifting through them, giving the water a sense of depth and texture. Near the surface, the pressure is familiar, 1 atmosphere, yet pressure in the ocean increases quickly compared to what we experience on land, because water is dense, and for roughly every 10 meters you go down, the pressure increases by about 1 atmosphere. This is a simple relationship that becomes quietly terrifying when you extend it, because by the time you reach 100 meters, the surrounding pressure is already about 11 atmospheres, and by 1,000 meters it is around 100 atmospheres, and still, in the Mariana Trench, you are not even close to the bottom. As you pass below 200 meters, the tone of the ocean changes with a kind of gentle inevitability, as if the world is dimming the lights not suddenly, but with the slow hand of a careful stage manager. This is the mesopelagic zone, often called the twilight zone, and it is a strange place because it still holds light, but not enough to sustain plant life. Sunlight exists here as a fading memory rather than a sustaining force. Colours vanish one by one as you sink, because water absorbs longer wavelengths first, and so reds fade quickly, then oranges and yellows, leaving only blues and muted greys, until the world begins to resemble a monochrome dream. In this twilight realm, Many creatures live in a state of perpetual dusk, and their bodies reflect that in subtle, almost poetic ways. Some have enormous sensitive eyes tuned to capture the faintest traces of downwelling light, while others adopt the opposite strategy and become nearly invisible, and with dark skins that swallow what little light remains. The mesopelagic is also famous for one of the largest daily migrations on Earth, a vertical movement of countless organisms, small fish, krill, gelatinous animals that rise toward the surface at night to feed and sink again before dawn, a mass motion through darkness that is so vast it is detectable on sonar like a living tide. But we continue down, and eventually the last residue of sunlight gives up entirely, and the ocean becomes truly black. This is the bathypelagic zone, beginning around 1,000 meters, and here the idea of night no longer applies, because night implies the possibility of morning, whereas in the deep ocean there is only a permanent absence of the sun. What light exists now comes from life itself, from bioluminescence, chemical reactions that produce faint blue-green glows, pulses, and steady points of light that appear in the darkness like quiet signals. In this depth range, bioluminescence is not rare decoration but a common language, used to attract mates, lure prey, confuse predators, or simply communicate presence in a world where sight is limited and sound travels far. The water grows colder as you descend, settling into temperatures only a few degrees above freezing. Because sunlight no longer warms these depths, and because deep currents distribute cold water around the planet like a slow, invisible circulatory system, the pressure continues to rise without pause, compressing everything, shaping biology itself, because at these depths, life is not just living in darkness. It is living under a crushing weight that changes how proteins fold, how cell membranes behave, and how even the simplest biological processes must be tuned. It is worth lingering on the concept of pressure, not in a dramatic way, but in a calm, almost mathematical way, because understanding pressure is part of understanding why the Mariana Trench remains so rarely visited. At sea level, the atmosphere presses on you with a force you do not feel because your body has evolved inside it. It is the baseline of life, but underwater, pressure rises quickly, and by the time you reach the deep trench environment, it reaches values that are difficult to imagine, around 1,000 bar at the deepest points, meaning the water presses with something like 1,000 times atmospheric pressure, and this is not a metaphor. It is literal force exerted on every square centimetre of surface. If you have ever seen a deep-sea submersible, you might have noticed that it often uses a spherical pressure hull, and this is not for aesthetics but for physics, because a sphere distributes stress evenly and resists collapse better than most other shapes. The deep ocean is one of the few places on Earth where engineering becomes a form of survival in the most direct sense, because the environment is not merely hostile, it is actively compressive, and any flaw becomes a place where the ocean can push inward with unstoppable persistence. Now we descend past 4,000 meters and enter the abyssal realm. The word abyss tends to sound like poetry, but in oceanography it refers to something very specific. Broad, deep seafloor plains that cover an enormous fraction of the planet's surface, gently sloping or nearly flat, carpeted with fine sediment. The abyssopelagic zone is the deep ocean near the bottom of these plains, typically from about 4,000 to 6,000 meters. And if the midwater darkness feels like floating through space, the abyssal plain feels like a silent desert, vast and patient, where the primary weather is the slow settling of particles from above. This is where the idea of marine snow becomes more than a metaphor and turns into the main nourishment system. Marine snow is the steady drift of organic debris, tiny dead plankton, fecal pellets, fragments of tissue, bits of mucus, falling from the brighter surface world down into the dark. And it is both humble and astonishing because it takes something as ordinary as decay and turns it into a global conveyor of energy. A particle of marine snow might begin as a living cell floating near sunlight, and weeks later it might reach the abyss, becoming food for creatures that live their entire lives in darkness, creatures that may never see a living plant, never experience a sunrise, and yet remain connected to the surface world through this slow, constant rain of organic matter. The abyssal environment shapes behavior in a way that feels almost like a philosophy. Movement tends to be slow, energy tends to be conserved, and many animals have adapted to long periods between meals because food is not abundant here in the way it is near coral reefs or coastal waters. Sea cucumbers, for example, can dominate certain abyssal areas, moving steadily across the sediment like gentle living vacuum cleaners, processing the mud to extract nutrients. There are also brittle stars, deep-sea fish, strange gelatinous animals and microbes that play a vast role in recycling chemicals, because in the deep ocean, microbes are often the quiet architects that determine what life can continue to exist. And yet, even at 6,000 meters, you have still not reached the Mariana Trench's deepest realm, because the trench belongs to a special category of depth known as the Hadal Zone. The Hadal Zone begins at roughly 6,000 meters and extends down to the deepest trenches, and it is named after Hades not because it is evil, but because for a long time it seemed like an underworld, distant, hidden, extreme, beyond ordinary reach. But the more we study it, the more it reveals that life has a talent for persistence that is both calm and shocking, because it does not need drama to be extraordinary. It only needs time to adapt. As we move from the abyss into the Hadal realm, the seafloor stops being a broad plain and becomes more like a steep landscape, with slopes and walls that descend into a trench axis, and with sediments that can slide downward in slow collapses or sudden flows triggered by earthquakes. The Mariana Trench lies along a tectonically active region because it is formed by subduction, where one tectonic plate slides beneath another, and that geological motion, though slow on human timescales, creates earthquakes and reshapes the trench over time. The deep ocean is not static, it is quietly dynamic, and the trench is one of the places where the planet's crust actively participates in a long, slow conversation with itself, bending, fracturing, and descending. At this point in our descent, it becomes important to understand what the Mariana Trench truly is in geological terms, not simply as a deep place, but as an expression of plate tectonics made visible underwater. The Earth's outer shell is broken into plates, and in the Western Pacific, the Pacific Plate moves and interacts with plates along the Mariana region in a way that forces oceanic crust downward into the mantle. The trench marks the surface expression of that bending, the place where the plate begins its descent, and above it, volcanic arcs can form where fluids released by the descending slab help generate magma, leading to chains of islands and underwater volcanoes. The Mariana Islands themselves are part of this system, a line of islands formed by processes linked to the same forces that create the trench. And here, as we continue to sink deeper into the Hadal darkness, the ocean seems to become even quieter, not because there is no sound can travel remarkably well in water, but because the world above feels infinitely far away, and because the usual cues of life on land, like wind and bird song and shifting light, have vanished. In their place is a steady sense of pressure, a cold stillness, and the knowledge that the water column above you is now many kilometers thick, a mass so heavy that it shapes every detail of what can exist. Somewhere down here lies Challenger Deep, but before we reach it, we should slow down and let the trench become a place rather than a number. Imagine the trench not as a single point, but as a long, narrow valley with steep sides, like a canyon carved into the planet's crust, filled not with air but with water and draped in darkness. Imagine the sediment, fine and soft, collecting in hollows, and imagine the slow drift of particles settling onto it. Imagine that if you placed a camera here and left it for hours, you might see almost nothing at first, just black water and occasional drifting snow of debris, and then perhaps, gradually, a pale creature would emerge from the darkness, moving with the unhurried precision of something that has no reason to waste energy. Because in the deep ocean the world rewards patience. It may surprise you to learn that trenches like the Mariana are not sterile voids. They can host thriving communities of organisms, including amphipods, small shrimp-like crustaceans that have been observed in great abundance at trench depths, often drawn to bait in lander experiments. Amphipods are a good example of how the trench can challenge our assumptions, because we might expect that life becomes rarer and rarer with depth, yet in some trench environments, where scavengers can appear in large numbers, suggesting that the deep sea has its own patterns of resource availability and ecological structure. There are also Hadal snail fish, delicate fish adapted to great pressure, that have been documented in the Hadal zone, though they do not necessarily occur at the very deepest point, and their existence reminds us that vertebrate life has found a way into places that once seemed too extreme even for imagination. But the trench is not just home to scavengers and fish, it is also a microbial world, and microbes do not merely survive down here, they shape the chemistry of the environment. In many deep-sea sediments, microbial communities process organic matter, recycle nutrients, and participate in cycles of carbon and nitrogen, functioning like invisible cities of metabolism. Even in the Hadal zone, where the pressure is immense and temperatures are low, microbes can persist, yes, sometimes adapted to these conditions in ways that challenge what we think we know about the limits of biology. One of the most unsettling and sobering discoveries in recent years is not about a monster or a myth, but about something far more ordinary and far more human. Evidence of pollution reaching even the deepest trench environments, including microplastics and persistent industrial chemicals that have been detected in deep-sea organisms and sediments. The idea that the deepest place on Earth, so distant, so difficult to reach, still bears traces of our surface civilization is a kind of quiet shock. Because it reveals that our actions can spread through the planet's systems in ways that are not easily contained. When we descend into the Mariana Trench, we are not entering a completely separate world. We are entering a part of Earth that is connected through water circulation and particle transport to everything happening above. As we approach the lower Hadal depths, the pressure becomes so high that it affects the very materials of life. And scientists have long been interested in how organisms manage this. Proteins, for example, can be destabilized by high pressure, and cell membranes can behave differently, becoming more rigid or more permeable depending on composition. Deep-sea organisms often show adaptations at the molecular level, including modifications to membrane lipids and pressure-tolerant enzymes, then allowing biochemical processes to function under conditions that would disrupt the proteins of many shallow water species. This is the kind of invisible adaptation that makes deep-sea life feel almost like a lesson in quiet resilience. The changes are not always obvious to the eye, but they are profound in function. If you imagine the trench simply as darkness and pressure, you might miss another key feature that shapes its ecology. The trench is a collecting point. Its sloping walls can funnel sediment and organic matter downward, and this can lead to accumulation in the trench axis, sometimes making the deepest parts less starved than we might assume. It is not that the trench is rich in the way coral reefs are rich, but rather that it can be a basin where the slow rain of marine snow, along with occasional larger inputs like carcasses or landslides of sediment, becomes concentrated. In the deep sea, rare events can matter for years, because a single whale fall, for example, can feed communities of organisms for a long time, creating a temporary island of abundance in a vast desert of scarcity. Now, as we descend still further, it becomes natural to wonder how humans have ever reached these depths at all. And the story of exploration is part of what gives the Mariana Trench its modern mythology, not because the trench is supernatural, but because the effort required to see it directly is so extreme that it becomes, by definition, rare. The first famous human descent to the deepest known ocean depths occurred in 1960, when Jacques Picard and Don Walsh piloted the bathyscaphe Trieste into Challenger Deep. Their dive remains one of the most remarkable feats of exploration, not because it involved violence or conquest, but because it involved engineering, courage, and the willingness to enter a world where everything outside the pressure hull would crush a human body instantly. They reported a flat seafloor and stirred up sediment, and although certain details reported at the time have been debated or refined in later discussions, the core truth remains: humans reached the deepest place in the ocean in a craft designed to withstand extraordinary pressure and returned alive, carrying the knowledge that the trench is not merely a theoretical depth, but a physical place. Decades later, in 2012, filmmaker and explorer James Cameron made a solo descent to Challenger Deep in the Deep-Sea Challenger submersible, collecting samples and imagery and bringing renewed attention to deep-sea exploration. More recently, further deep dives and mapping efforts, often involving advanced submersibles, remotely operated vehicles, and autonomous systems, have continued to expand our knowledge of trench biology and geology, because the deep ocean is not explored in a single heroic moment. It is explored through repeated, careful observation, through mapping, sampling, and patience. But even with these expeditions, the Mariana Trench remains largely unknown, and that is one of the reasons it works so well as a long, calm documentary subject, because the mystery is not manufactured, it is real and structural. We have only visited the deepest point a small number of times. We cannot easily place long-term instruments there without risk. We cannot dive there casually the way we can visit coral reefs. And although mapping technologies have improved dramatically, and although sonar can reveal the shape of the seafloor with increasing resolution, the trench is still a place where the gap between what exists and what we have personally observed remains enormous. As we near the concept of Challenger Deep, it's important to hold on to one more quiet truth. The deepest point is not necessarily the most dramatic in the way shallow reefs are dramatic, because deep life often expresses itself through subtlety. You might not see bright colours, as you might see pale forms. You might not see rapid movement. You might see slow drifting. You might not see crowded ecosystems. You might see occasional creatures separated by distances that feel vast. And yet every single organism down here is a triumph of adaptation, a living statement that Earth's biosphere extends farther and deeper than the instincts of a land-based species would ever predict. In the next part of our journey, we will explore the experience of descending through the Mariana Trench in greater sensory detail, imagining the gradual transition from surface light to complete darkness, and considering how the environment would appear to a human observer travelling downward through the deepest waters on Earth. If it were possible to descend quietly and safely through the waters above the Mariana Trench, while remaining fully aware of the surroundings, the experience would unfold not as a sudden transition but as a gradual transformation in which the familiar world fades away layer by layer. The descent would begin in brightness and movement, surrounded by the shifting reflections of sunlight on the surface and the subtle motion of waves overhead. Yet even in these first moments there would be a sense of entering a vertical dimension rarely experienced in everyday life, a direction that extends not across the horizon but downward into distances far greater than most landscapes on land. The surface of our planet appears stable to us because the changes are usually too slow to notice, yet the solid crust beneath oceans and continents is divided into enormous plates that float on the softer layers of the mantle below, and these tectonic plates are constantly moving in relation to one another at speeds that may seem small on a yearly scale, but become enormous over geological time. Some plates pull apart, creating new ocean crust at spreading ridges where molten rock rises slowly from below and solidifies as it cools, while others slide past one another along faults where stress accumulates and is occasionally released as earthquakes. In certain regions, however, plates move toward each other, and when this happens between two sections of oceanic crust, or between oceanic and continental crust, one plate may begin to sink beneath the other in a process known as subduction. The Mariana Trench marks one of these subduction zones, a place where the Pacific plate bends downward and sinks beneath the smaller Mariana plate, descending slowly into the mantle as part of a cycle that continuously renews the ocean floor. Oceanic crust forms at mid-ocean ridges and gradually spreads outward over millions of years, cooling and becoming denser as it ages. And eventually some portions of this crust reach regions where they begin their return journey into the interior of the Earth. The trench is the point where this descent begins, the place where the rigid oceanic plate curves downward like a massive geological conveyor belt carrying rock into the deep interior of the planet. If we could remove the ocean water and look directly at the trench and cross-section, we would see something that resembles a vast downward fold in the Earth's crust, with the Pacific plate bending steeply into the mantle, while sediments accumulate along the edges and within the trench axis. The descending plate does not plunge straight downward, but instead forms a gently curving slab that can extend hundreds of kilometers into the mantle, where increasing temperatures and pressures gradually alter its structure and composition. This is not a violent collapse, but a slow and continuous movement that has been underway for tens of millions of years, a process so gradual that the trench itself evolves over timescales far longer than human history. The existence of the Mariana Trench reflects the deeper circulation of matter within the Earth, kind of planetary metabolism in which new crust forms at spreading ridges and old crust is eventually recycled into the mantle through subduction zones. Without this process, the Earth's surface would look very different, because plate tectonics not only shapes the continents and oceans, but also influences volcanic activity, mountain formation, and even long-term climate patterns through its effects on atmospheric gases. The trench is therefore not merely a deep place in the ocean, but part of a vast interconnected system that links the ocean floor to the deep interior of the planet. As the Pacific plate bends downward into the trench, it does not remain perfectly rigid, and the stress created by this bending produces fractures and faults that can trigger earthquakes. The Mariana region experiences frequent seismic activity, most of it too small to be noticed by people on the surface but detectable by sensitive instruments that monitor the vibrations of the Earth. Occasionally larger earthquakes occur as accumulated stresses are released, shifting sections of crust by small distances that nevertheless represent enormous amounts of energy when measured on a geological scale. These earthquakes remind us that the trench is not a static structure, but a dynamic boundary where the Earth's crust continues to move and adjust. Above the descending plate lies another important feature of subduction zones, the volcanic arc. As the Pacific plate sinks deeper into the mantle, it carries with it water and minerals trapped within the rock, and under the increasing heat and pressure of the mantle, these materials release fluids that rise into the overlying mantle rock. The presence of these fluids lowers the melting temperature of the surrounding material, allowing magma to form at depths where it would otherwise remain solid. This magma can rise toward the surface, eventually producing chains of volcanoes that trace the path of the subduction zone. The Mariana Islands, which give the trench its name, are part of such a volcanic arc, a line of islands created by processes that originate far below the ocean floor. Although volcanoes and trenches may seem unrelated at first glance, they are in fact complementary expressions of the same underlying process, and the quiet waters above the Mariana Trench conceal a region where the Earth's internal heat and mechanical forces interact continuously. Deep beneath the ocean's surface, rocks are slowly being carried downward while magma rises upward elsewhere. And over millions of years, these movements reshape the boundaries of ocean basins in ways that only careful geological study can reveal. The age of the Pacific plate near the Mariana Trench contributes significantly to the trench's extraordinary depth, because older oceanic crust becomes cooler and denser as it moves away from the spreading ridges where it formed. Dense crust sinks more readily into the mantle, and the bending of a heavy plate can produce deeper trenches than those formed by younger, more buoyant crust. The Pacific Plate in this region is among the oldest sections of oceanic crust on Earth, and its density allows it to descend steeply, creating the extreme depths characteristic of the Mariana Trench. Geologists estimate that the trench has been developing for tens of millions of years, and during that time its exact shape and depth have changed as sediment accumulated, plates shifted, and earthquakes altered the landscape. The trench we see today is therefore only a moment in a much longer geological story, and millions of years from now it may look different again, perhaps deeper in some places or partially filled with sediments in others, depending on how tectonic forces continue to evolve. Even the deepest point, Challenger Deep, is not a perfectly fixed location, but part of a broader region where the seafloor reaches extraordinary depths. Precise measurements have improved over time as technology has advanced, and modern sonar mapping and pressure-based instruments have provided increasingly accurate estimates of the trench's depth. While early measurements made in the 19th century relied on weighted lines lowered into the water, modern surveys use multi-beam sonar systems capable of mapping large areas of the seafloor with remarkable precision. These systems emit sound pulses that travel downward through the water, reflect off the seafloor, and return to receivers that calculate depth based on the time required for the signal to return. Sound travels efficiently in seawater, making sonar an essential tool for studying the deep ocean, and without it the Mariana Trench would remain largely unknown even today. Detailed maps reveal that the trench floor is not perfectly smooth, but contains ridges, slopes, and sediment-filled basins shaped by both geological processes and the slow accumulation of material from above. In some areas, landslides triggered by earthquakes or sediment instability can send large masses of material downward along the trench walls, reshaping the seafloor in ways that may take thousands of years to stabilize. The trench also serves as a pathway through which surface materials eventually return to the Earth's interior, because sediments and organic matter that accumulate on the descending plate are carried downward as subduction continues, and some of this material may eventually melt or react chemically within the mantle, contributing to the long-term cycling of elements between the Earth's surface and its deeper layers. This process connects the deepest ocean trenches to global systems that include volcanic activity, atmospheric chemistry, and even the distribution of nutrients in the ocean. Understanding the Mariana Trench in geological terms also changes the way we think about time, because the processes that created it unfold on scales far beyond ordinary human experience. A centimetre of plate movement per year may seem insignificant, yet over 1 million years that motion amounts to 10 kilometres, and over tens of millions of years, entire sections of ocean crust can travel from their birthplace at mid-ocean ridges to their final descent into subduction zones. The trench is therefore a reminder that the Earth is not static but continuously evolving, shaped by forces that operate so slowly they become visible only through careful scientific reconstruction. If we imagine standing on the seafloor at Challenger Deep, we would be standing on crust that once formed thousands of kilometers away, perhaps beneath a spreading ridge where molten rock cooled into new ocean floor. That crust would have travelled slowly across the ocean basin, and carrying with it sediments and the chemical traces of ancient seawater, until eventually reaching the Mariana region, where it began its downward journey into the mantle. In this sense, the trench represents not only a destination, but a transition, a boundary between the surface world and the deeper Earth. And as our imagined descent continues toward the deepest point, the geological story blends with the physical reality of the environment itself, because the shape of the trench influences how sediments accumulate, how organisms distribute themselves, and how currents move through the depths. The steep walls and narrow axis create conditions unlike those of the broad abyssal plains, and these differences help produce the unique ecological patterns that scientists are still working to understand. In the next stage of our journey, we will continue downward into Challenger Deep itself, exploring the deepest known region of the trench and examining the extraordinary conditions that exist there, including the immense pressure, the near-freezing temperatures, and the technological challenges that have limited human visits to only a small number of expeditions. There we will look more closely at the measurements that define the deepest point on Earth, the submersibles that have reached it, and the surprising discoveries made in a place once thought to be almost completely lifeless. And as we continue, the descent will become even quieter and more extreme, moving toward a part of the ocean where the surface world feels unimaginably distant, and where the limits of exploration are still being slowly extended by science. As the descent continues into the deepest reaches of the Mariana Trench, the surrounding ocean becomes less like a place and more like a vast physical condition, an environment defined not by scenery or motion, but by pressure, cold, and distance from the surface world. Somewhere below lies Challenger Deep, the deepest known location in the global ocean, a region where the seafloor reaches nearly 11,000 meters beneath the surface, and where the water above forms a column so immense that it presses downward with a force difficult to imagine in ordinary terms. The trench narrows as we approach its deepest axis, and the sloping walls give way to a basin-like region where fine sediments accumulate slowly over centuries, settling into a landscape shaped more by gravity and quiet deposition than by dramatic geological events. Precise measurements of Challenger Deep have evolved over time as technology improved, yet modern surveys using multi-beam sonar and pressure-calibrated instruments consistently place the deepest areas between approximately 10,900 and 11,000 meters, making this region the most profound natural depression known on Earth. The number itself carries a certain abstract quality, because depth alone does not convey what such a place actually feels like, and it is only when we translate depth into physical conditions that the environment becomes easier to grasp. At the deepest parts of Challenger Deep, the pressure reaches roughly 1,100 bars, meaning that each square centimetre of surface experiences a force exceeding 1 metric ton, an intensity capable of collapsing most unprotected structures instantly and compressing materials in ways rarely encountered elsewhere on the planet. Temperature at these depths remains remarkably stable, usually hovering just above freezing at around 1 to 2 degrees Celsius, maintained by deep ocean circulation that slowly distributes cold water throughout the abyssal and hadal zones. Unlike surface waters, which change with seasons and weather, the deep ocean experiences an almost timeless stability, with conditions remaining nearly constant for thousands of years. This stability creates an environment where change occurs slowly, and where organisms must adapt not to sudden fluctuations, but to the persistent extremes of darkness and pressure. The darkness here is complete in a way that few places on Earth can match, because sunlight cannot penetrate anywhere near these depths, and the faint glow of the surface world might as well belong to another planet. Even the bioluminescent flashes that appear in shallower deep waters become less common near the trench floor, where life is often sparse and movement infrequent. If a camera were placed on the seafloor and left recording for hours, it might capture long stretches of apparent stillness, interrupted occasionally by the slow approach of a small crustacean or the drifting passage of suspended particles settling through the water column. Despite the apparent emptiness, the trench floor is far from lifeless, and one of the surprising discoveries of modern deep-sea exploration is the extent to which organisms have adapted to these conditions. Amphipods, small crustaceans related to shrimp, have been found in remarkable abundance at Hadal depths, often gathering quickly around experimental bait deployed by researchers studying trench ecosystems. These animals represent a form of life well suited to the trench environment, capable of locating scarce food sources and processing organic material that arrives from above in the form of marine snow or occasional larger remains. Their presence demonstrates that even in the deepest parts of the ocean, ecological relationships continue to operate, linking organisms into networks of consumption and recycling. Among the most remarkable inhabitants of the Hadal zone are the Hadal snailfish, delicate vertebrates that have been observed at depths exceeding 8,000 meters and represent some of the deepest living fish known to science. These fish possess bodies that appear fragile by surface standards, with gelatinous tissues and reduced skeletal structures that help them maintain neutral buoyancy and tolerate the immense pressure of their environment. Rather than resisting compression with heavy armor or rigid structures, snailfish rely on biochemical adaptations that allow their cellular processes to function normally despite the surrounding pressure. Certain molecules within their tissues help stabilize proteins and enzymes, preventing them from being distorted by forces that would disrupt the biology of most other fish. The presence of vertebrate animals at such depths was once considered unlikely, because early scientists believed that the pressures of the deep ocean would make complex life impossible. Over time, however, repeated observations have demonstrated that evolution has produced organisms capable of surviving in environments far more extreme than once imagined. The trench serves as a reminder that biological limits are often broader than our initial assumptions, and that life has repeatedly found ways to adapt to conditions that appear hostile from a human perspective. The sediments covering the floor of Challenger Deep consist largely of fine particles that have settled slowly from the waters above, forming layers that may accumulate at rates measured in millimeters per 1,000 years. Within these sediments live microbial communities that carry out chemical transformations essential to deep-sea ecosystems, breaking down organic material and recycling nutrients that support other organisms. These microbes exist at the foundation of trench ecology, functioning quietly and continuously in a world where sunlight never reaches and where energy arrives only in scattered and unpredictable forms. One of the most unexpected findings from recent expeditions to the Mariana Trench has been the discovery of human-derived materials even at the greatest depths, including microplastics and persistent organic pollutants that have been detected in sediments and in the tissues of deep-sea organisms. These discoveries illustrate the remarkable connectivity of the Earth's systems, showing that materials released at the surface can eventually reach even the most remote environments through processes of circulation and sedimentation. The realization that the deepest point on Earth contains traces of industrial civilization carries a quiet emotional weight, reminding us that no part of the planet is completely isolated from human influence. Human exploration of Challenger Deep has occurred only a handful of times, and each descent represents a complex combination of engineering, planning, and careful risk management. The first successful manned descent took place in 1960, when Jacques Picard and Don Walsh piloted the bathyscaphe Trieste to the trench floor. The Trieste consisted of a spherical pressure hull attached to a large float filled with gasoline, a substance less dense than seawater that provided buoyancy without being compressed significantly by pressure. Yet the crew descended slowly over several hours, eventually reaching the seafloor where they observed a flat sedimented landscape before beginning their return to the surface. More than 50 years later, filmmaker and explorer James Cameron conducted a solo descent in the submersible deep-sea Challenger, bringing modern imaging equipment and sampling tools into the trench and capturing detailed footage of the seafloor environment. Cameron's expedition demonstrated how advances in materials science and engineering have expanded the possibilities of deep-sea exploration, yet allowing scientists and explorers to collect data that would have been impossible to obtain in earlier decades. Subsequent expeditions, including those conducted by Victor Vescovo and the Five Deeps expedition, have further expanded our knowledge of Challenger Deep, using advanced submersibles capable of repeated descents and carrying instruments designed to measure pressure, temperature, and chemical conditions with high precision. These missions have revealed that the deepest regions of the trench are more complex than once assumed, with subtle variations in depth and terrain that reflect ongoing geological processes. The descent to Challenger Deep typically requires several hours, during which a submersible moves steadily downward through the water column, while instruments monitor depth and environmental conditions. The ascent may take a similar amount of time, making each visit to the trench floor a carefully planned event in which only a limited period can be spent at maximum depth before the return journey must begin. Because each dive involves significant logistical effort and expense, the opportunities for direct observation remain rare, and much of what we know about the trench comes from remotely operated vehicles and instrument packages lowered from research vessels. Even with modern technology, the trench remains a difficult environment to study, and many aspects of its biology and geology remain uncertain. The extreme pressure challenges the durability of electronic components and mechanical systems, while the great depth limits communication speeds and complicates navigation. Instruments must be designed not only to function under high pressure, but also to survive repeated deployments and recoveries in an environment where repair is impossible once a mission has begun. Standing mentally on the floor of Challenger Deep, it becomes easier to appreciate the scale of the ocean above, because the water column stretches upward for nearly 11 kilometers, forming a barrier between the trench and the surface world that few signals or disturbances can easily cross. Sound travels efficiently through seawater and can propagate across great distances, yet even acoustic signals weaken with distance and may be distorted by variations in temperature and pressure. Light, by contrast, disappears entirely long before reaching these depths, leaving the trench in permanent darkness except for the occasional artificial illumination of research equipment. The sense of isolation at Challenger Deep is profound not because the environment is empty, but because it is distant from the rhythms that define everyday life. There are no tides visible here in the usual sense, no cycles of day and night, no seasonal blooms of plankton. Instead, there is a quiet constancy, punctuated occasionally by the slow arrival of organic material or the subtle rearrangement of sediments along the trench floor. And yet even here, at the deepest known point on Earth, the processes of the planet continue uninterrupted. Plates continue to move, sediments continue to settle, microbes continue their chemical work, small animals continue to search for food in the darkness. The trench is not a static monument but an active part of Earth's system, participating in cycles that extend from the surface ocean to the deep interior of the planet. In the next part of our journey, we will explore in greater detail the extraordinary organisms that inhabit the Hadal Zone, examining how life survives under pressures that exceed 1,000 atmospheres, and how evolution has shaped bodies and behaviors suited to an environment where energy is scarce and conditions remain extreme. The creatures of the trench may appear delicate or ghost-like, yet each represents a solution to one of the most challenging environments on Earth. And together they form a community that continues to expand our understanding of what life can endure. As our imagined presence settles more fully into the depths of the Mariana Trench, it becomes increasingly clear that the greatest surprise of this environment is not the darkness or the pressure, but the quiet persistence of life itself. Because in a place where sunlight has never reached, and where the weight of the ocean presses downward with enormous force, organisms continue to survive in forms that reflect millions of years of gradual adaptation. The Hadal Zone, extending from roughly 6,000 meters down to the deepest trenches, represents one of the most extreme biological environments on Earth, and yet it is not a barren void but a living system shaped by scarcity, stability, and the slow rhythms of the deep ocean. Life in the trench exists within a delicate balance between energy arriving from above and the biological processes that transform that energy into survival. And the organisms that live here have evolved strategies that minimize waste and maximize efficiency. Movement tends to be slow and deliberate. Growth often proceeds gradually, and many animals appear almost fragile when viewed through cameras lowered into the depths. Yet their apparent delicacy conceals biochemical resilience that allows them to function under pressures capable of crushing most surface organisms instantly. Among the most frequently encountered inhabitants of the Mariana Trench are amphipods, small crustaceans that resemble translucent shrimp, and that have become emblematic of Hadal ecosystems because of their abundance and adaptability. When researchers lower baited traps or camera landers into the trench, amphipods often appear within hours, gathering in surprising numbers to feed on whatever organic material has reached the seafloor. These animals rely heavily on chemical sensing to locate food in the darkness, detecting faint traces dissolved in the water and following gradients that lead them toward potential sources of nutrition. Their bodies are typically pale or nearly transparent, a common characteristic among deep-sea organisms where pigmentation offers little advantage in permanent darkness. Amphipods play an important ecological role as scavengers, processing organic matter that sinks from the surface ocean or arrives in larger pulses such as dead fish or marine mammals. Because food sources are unpredictable and widely spaced, amphipods have evolved digestive systems capable of extracting energy efficiently from whatever material becomes available. Some species are capable of consuming tough organic substances such as chitin or collagen, allowing them to make use of remains that other organisms might find difficult to digest. The abundance of amphipods in trench environments suggests that scavenging represents one of the primary pathways through which energy flows at these depths, linking the surface ocean indirectly to the deepest ecosystems. Not all trench organisms depend exclusively on scavenging, and among the most remarkable discoveries of recent decades are the Hadal snailfish, delicate vertebrates that have been documented living at depths exceeding 8,000 meters. These fish appear almost ethereal when illuminated by submersible lights, their bodies soft and translucent, their movements slow and controlled as they navigate through water that presses inward with tremendous force. Unlike many shallow water fish, we snailfish possess reduced skeletal structures and tissues adapted to maintain neutral buoyancy without the need for large gas-filled swim bladders, which would collapse under high pressure. The ability of snailfish to survive at extreme depths depends partly on specialized molecules within their cells that help stabilize proteins against pressure-induced distortion. One such compound, known as trimethylamine N-oxide, or TMAO, accumulates in increasing concentrations in deeper living species and helps maintain the proper functioning of enzymes under high pressure. This biochemical adaptation illustrates how life at great depth often relies not on dramatic anatomical differences, but on subtle molecular changes that allow ordinary biological processes to continue under extraordinary conditions. Although snailfish represent the deepest living fish known so far, they appear to have an upper depth limit beyond which vertebrate life becomes increasingly rare, suggesting that the biochemical challenges of extreme pressure eventually impose constraints that even evolution has difficulty overcoming. Observations indicate that fish become less common beyond approximately 8 to 8,500 meters, and the deepest portions of Challenger Deep may be inhabited primarily by invertebrates and microbial communities rather than by vertebrate animals. The trench floor also supports populations of sea cucumbers, slow-moving echinoderms that feed by ingesting sediment and extracting organic particles from the mud. These animals often appear in video recordings as elongated forms gliding steadily across the seafloor, leaving faint trails behind them as they process the sediment in search of nourishment. Sea cucumbers represent a form of life particularly well suited to environments where food arrives gradually and must be extracted from large volumes of material, and their digestive activity contributes to the recycling of nutrients within trench ecosystems. Another important group of trench inhabitants includes polychaete worms, segmented marine worms that live within the sediments or crawl slowly across the seafloor in search of organic material. Some polychaetes construct small burrows or tubes within the mud, creating microhabitats that support additional microbial activity and influence the physical structure of the sediments. Although these worms rarely appear prominently in video recordings, they play an important role in the functioning of deep-sea ecosystems by mixing sediments and facilitating chemical exchanges between the water and the seabed. Among the more unusual organisms found in deep-sea sediments are xenophyophores, large single-celled organisms that construct elaborate structures by binding sediment particles together with organic secretions. Despite being composed of a single cell, Eosinophiophores can reach sizes of several centimeters and create complex branching or plate-like forms that rest on the seafloor. These organisms contribute to habitat diversity by providing surfaces and shelters that can be used by smaller animals, illustrating how even microscopic life can influence the structure of deep-sea communities on a larger scale. The microbial life of the trench remains one of its least visible yet most important components, because bacteria and archaea carry out chemical processes that sustain the entire ecosystem. Within the sediments, microbes break down organic matter arriving from above, releasing nutrients that become available to other organisms and maintaining the cycles of carbon and nitrogen that support life throughout the ocean. Some microbes appear capable of surviving under pressures far exceeding those found at the surface, demonstrating biochemical adaptations that continue to be studied for their implications in fields ranging from biotechnology to the search for life in extreme environments beyond Earth. Bioluminescence becomes less prominent near the trench floor than in shallower deep waters, yet it still occurs among certain organisms, particularly those living slightly above the sediments where encounters between animals remain possible. The light produced by these organisms typically falls within the blue-green portion of the spectrum, wavelengths that travel efficiently through seawater and require relatively little energy to produce. In an environment where energy is scarce, even the production of light must be carefully balanced against survival needs, and many species emit light only briefly or in response to specific stimuli. One of the defining characteristics of trench organisms is their tendency towards soft bodies and reduced structural rigidity, because rigid structures are more vulnerable to pressure-induced stress. Instead of resisting compression, many deep-sea animals allow their bodies to equilibrate with the surrounding pressure, minimizing differences between internal and external forces. This approach reduces mechanical strain and allows organisms to survive in conditions that would damage more rigidly constructed bodies. The scarcity of food shapes behavior throughout the trench ecosystem, encouraging strategies that reduce energy expenditure and increase the likelihood of locating nourishment when it becomes available. Some animals rely heavily on chemical detection to locate distant food sources, while others adopt ambush strategies or filter small particles from the water. Because meals may be separated by long intervals, many trench organisms are capable of enduring extended periods without feeding, slowing their metabolism and conserving energy until resources become available again. Despite the extreme conditions of the Hadal zone, the diversity of life continues to expand as new expeditions reveal species previously unknown to science. Each descent into the trench has the potential to uncover organisms that have never been described, and even familiar groups such as crustaceans and worms often include species unique to particular trench environments. The isolation of trenches from one another may promote the evolution of distinct communities, making each trench a kind of natural laboratory where evolution proceeds along slightly different paths. The study of Hadal life has also provided insights into the fundamental limits of biological adaptation, helping scientists understand how organisms respond to pressure, cold, and nutrient scarcity. These insights extend beyond oceanography, influencing research in microbiology, biochemistry, and astrobiology, where extreme environments on Earth serve as analogues for conditions that might exist on other worlds. The ability of life to persist in the Mariana Trench suggests that environments once considered uninhabitable may in fact support biological activity under the right conditions. As we remain mentally suspended in the depths of the trench, it becomes easier to appreciate the quiet rhythms that define this environment, because the apparent stillness is actually the result of processes unfolding slowly but continuously. Sediments settle, microbes metabolize, scavengers search for food, and occasional disturbances such as landslides or carcass falls introduce pulses of change that ripple outward through the ecosystem. The trench is a place where time seems stretched, where events unfold gradually, and where survival depends on patience as much as on adaptation. In the next part of our journey, we will explore some of the most surprising scientific discoveries made in the Mariana Trench, including unexpected chemical processes, the presence of human-derived materials at extreme depths, and the ongoing exploration that continues to reveal new information about one of the least understood environments on Earth. These discoveries illustrate how the trench is not only a place of mystery, but also a source of knowledge that continues to reshape our understanding of the oceans and the planet as a whole. As scientific exploration of the Mariana Trench has gradually expanded over the past decades, researchers have uncovered discoveries that challenge long-standing assumptions about the limits of life and the reach of human influence, revealing that even the most remote environments on Earth are connected to the surface world through subtle but persistent pathways. The deepest parts of the ocean were once imagined as isolated and nearly sterile regions where life struggled to survive. Yet each new expedition has demonstrated that the Hadal Zone is far more dynamic and complex than early scientists expected, and that the trench contains a record not only of natural processes, but also of the modern age. One of the most striking discoveries made in recent years has been the detection of microscopic plastic particles within sediments and organisms collected from trench depths. A finding that has reshaped our understanding of how widely human-produced materials have spread throughout the planet. Microplastics, which originate from the breakdown of larger plastic objects as well as from industrial and consumer products, have been found in samples retrieved from depths approaching those of Challenger Deep, demonstrating that particles released into the environment at the surface can eventually travel thousands of meters downward through a combination of ocean currents, biological transport, and the steady settling of marine snow. These particles do not sink rapidly, but instead drift slowly through the water column, sometimes becoming incorporated into aggregates of organic material that increase their density and allow them to descend more efficiently. As marine snow settles toward the seafloor, it carries with it traces of the surface environment, including fragments of plastic, fibers from synthetic textiles, and residues of industrial chemicals that bind to organic particles. Over time, these materials accumulate within deep-sea sediments, creating a record of modern human activity preserved in one of the most inaccessible regions on Earth. The discovery of microplastics in trench organisms has added a biological dimension to this picture, because amphipods collected from Hadal depths have been found to contain plastic particles within their digestive systems. These animals ingest sediment and organic debris as part of their normal feeding behavior, and in doing so they inadvertently consume materials that originated far above them in the ocean. The presence of plastics in these animals demonstrates not only the physical reach of pollution, but also the integration of human-derived substances into deep-sea food webs, a development that scientists are still working to understand in terms of long-term ecological consequences. Alongside plastic contamination, researchers have identified persistent organic pollutants within trench organisms, including compounds that were produced industrially and transported globally through atmospheric and oceanic circulation. Some of these chemicals bind strongly to organic matter and accumulate in sediments, where they can remain for long periods before being incorporated into the tissues of deep-sea animals. The detection of these substances in hadal amphipods has revealed that even environments separated from human activity by kilometers of water are not immune to the spread of industrial compounds, illustrating the global scale of environmental connectivity. Another discovery that has reshaped our understanding of the Mariana Trench involves the extraordinary diversity of microbial life found within hadal sediments. Although microbes cannot be seen directly without specialized instruments, their presence can be detected through chemical analyses and genetic sequencing techniques that reveal complex communities adapted to the trench environment. These microorganisms carry out metabolic processes that allow them to survive under extreme pressure and limited nutrient availability, and in doing so they play a crucial role in recycling organic matter and maintaining the chemical balance of the ecosystem. Some microbial species appear capable of metabolizing compounds that would be toxic to many other organisms, including hydrocarbons and other complex molecules transported from the surface. The ability of microbes to break down these substances contributes to the gradual transformation of organic material within the sediments, and helps prevent the accumulation of certain compounds over long periods. In this way, its microbial communities act as a kind of biological processing system that quietly reshapes the chemistry of the trench environment. The study of microbial life in the Mariana Trench has also revealed forms of metabolism that operate independently of sunlight, relying instead on chemical energy derived from the breakdown of organic matter or from reactions involving dissolved minerals. This process, known as chemosynthesis, allows organisms to produce energy without the need for photosynthesis, and represents an alternative pathway through which biological systems can function. Although large hydrothermal vent systems are not a dominant feature within the trench itself, localized chemical gradients within sediments provide opportunities for chemosynthetic microbes to thrive, demonstrating that energy can enter ecosystems through multiple routes. Another surprising discovery involves the structural strength of biological materials produced by trench organisms, which must withstand pressures far exceeding those encountered by most life on Earth. Studies of amphipod exoskeletons have shown that certain species incorporate aluminum compounds into their outer layers, a feature that may help reinforce their bodies against pressure-related stress. Though this unexpected adaptation illustrates how evolution can produce solutions that appear unusual from a human perspective, yet function effectively within the specific conditions of a given environment. Researchers have also been surprised by the apparent activity levels of certain trench organisms, because early assumptions suggested that life at great depths would be extremely sluggish due to limited energy availability. While many deep-sea animals do move slowly, their observations have shown that amphipods and other scavengers can respond quickly to newly introduced food sources, sometimes arriving within hours of bait deployment despite the vast distances involved. This responsiveness suggests that trench organisms maintain sensory systems capable of detecting chemical signals across considerable ranges, allowing them to exploit rare opportunities when food becomes available. The mapping of the Mariana Trench has revealed additional complexities that challenge earlier views of the trench as a simple V-shaped depression. High-resolution sonar surveys have shown that the trench floor includes multiple basins and ridges, separated by subtle variations in depth, and that the deepest points are distributed across a broader region rather than confined to a single narrow location. These variations reflect the influence of tectonic forces as well as the accumulation and redistribution of sediments over time, creating a landscape more intricate than early measurements suggested. Seismic studies have added further layers of understanding by revealing the internal structure of the subducting Pacific Plate as it descends into the mantle beneath the trench. By analysing the way seismic waves travel through the Earth, scientists can infer the geometry and composition of the descending slab, providing insights into the processes that drive subduction and shape the trench environment. These studies show that the Pacific Plate continues downward for hundreds of kilometres beneath the Mariana region, forming a vast geological structure that connects the surface trench to the deep interior of the planet. The Mariana Trench has also become an important site for studying the limits of engineering and material science, because instruments deployed to Hadal depths must function reliably under pressures that exceed those encountered in most industrial environments. Advances in pressure-resistant housings, synthetic materials, and electronic components have allowed researchers to conduct increasingly sophisticated experiments at extreme depths. We are expanding the range of measurements that can be made directly within the trench. These technological developments not only support oceanographic research, but also contribute to broader fields such as aerospace engineering and high-pressure physics. One of the more subtle discoveries made through long-term monitoring of deep-sea environments is the realization that even the deepest parts of the ocean are influenced by processes occurring at the surface on seasonal and interannual timescales. Variations in plankton productivity, driven by changes in ocean temperature and nutrient availability, can affect the amount of organic material that eventually reaches the trench floor. Although the journey from surface to seafloor may take weeks or months, the cumulative effect of these variations can influence deep-sea ecosystems over longer periods, linking the trench indirectly to climate patterns occurring far above. The accumulation of data from multiple expeditions has gradually transformed the Mariana Trench from a mysterious blank space on maps into a scientifically rich environment where geology, biology, and chemistry intersect. Yet despite these advances, the trench remains only partially explored, and each new expedition has the potential to reveal phenomena not previously observed. The sense of discovery associated with the trench arises not from speculation, but from the simple fact that so much of the environment remains beyond direct observation. In the next part of our journey, we will turn towards some of the genuine mysteries that remain unsolved within the Mariana Trench, exploring the unanswered questions that continue to motivate research and the unusual observations that have yet to be fully explained. These mysteries do not rely on legends or exaggeration, but emerge naturally from the limits of current knowledge, reflecting the reality that the deepest parts of the ocean remain among the least understood regions of the Earth. Even after decades of scientific exploration and technological progress, the Mariana Trench remains one of the least understood environments on Earth, not because scientists lack curiosity or dedication, but because the sheer difficulty of reaching these depths limits how often observations can be made. The trench is not mysterious in the sense of hidden creatures or unknown forces beyond science, but rather in the quieter and more enduring sense that large portions of its geology and biology remain only partially documented, leaving researchers with a landscape where certainty and uncertainty exist side by side. One of the most persistent mysteries involves the true diversity of life within the Hadal zone, because every expedition that retrieves biological samples tends to reveal species that have never been described before, suggesting that the trench may contain far more biological variety than current records indicate. The difficulty of collecting intact specimens from such extreme depths means that many organisms are known only from fragments or from images captured by remote cameras, and genetic analyses often reveal distinct lineages even among animals that appear similar to the eye. This pattern suggests that trenches may act as isolated evolutionary environments where populations diverge over long periods, producing species uniquely adapted to particular regions. The question of how organisms disperse between trenches remains only partly understood, because the Hadal zones of different ocean basins are separated by thousands of kilometers of shallower seafloor that may represent barriers to species adapted specifically to extreme depths. Some scientists believe that certain organisms may spread during larval stages when they are carried by deep currents, while others may have evolved independently within separate trench systems. The answers remain uncertain, and understanding these patterns may require decades of additional sampling and genetic analysis. Another unresolved question concerns the long-term stability of trench ecosystems and the extent to which they respond to changes occurring in the surface ocean. Although the deep sea appears stable on short timescales, variations in climate and ocean circulation over centuries or millennia may influence the amount of organic material reaching Hadal depths. Sediment cores extracted from trench environments preserve layers that accumulate gradually over time, providing records of past environmental conditions that scientists continue to interpret in order to understand how the deep ocean has responded to historical changes in climate and ocean productivity. Seafloor mapping has revealed that the Mariana Trench contains subtle features whose origins are not always immediately clear, including ridges and depressions that may reflect complex interactions between tectonic forces and sediment transport. Landslides triggered by earthquakes can redistribute large volumes of material along the trench walls, and the timing and frequency of such events remain difficult to reconstruct. Some areas of the trench show evidence of relatively recent sediment disturbances, suggesting that geological activity continues to reshape the seafloor even in the deepest regions. The behavior of sound within the trench environment presents another area of ongoing investigation, because sound waves can travel long distances through seawater, yet may be influenced by variations in temperature, pressure, and seafloor topography. Hydrophones deployed in deep waters have recorded a wide range of acoustic signals, including distant earthquakes, submarine landslides, and biological sounds produced by marine animals. Interpreting these recordings can be challenging, particularly when signals overlap or originate from sources located far beyond the immediate study area. Some of the most intriguing acoustic observations involve low-frequency sounds detected in deep ocean environments that cannot always be traced immediately to specific sources. In many cases, Further analysis reveals natural explanations such as geological activity or biological behavior. Yet the process of identification can take considerable time and careful comparison with known signals. These investigations illustrate how the deep ocean can produce phenomena that initially appear unusual, simply because they occur in an environment that is rarely observed directly. Another mystery concerns the precise limits of life under extreme pressure, because although organisms have been documented at great depths, the point at which pressure becomes incompatible with biological processes remains uncertain. Laboratory experiments have shown that certain microbes can survive pressures comparable to those found in the deepest trenches, yet the distribution of such organisms in natural environments is still being studied. Determining the ultimate limits of life under pressure has implications not only for oceanography, but also for the study of possible life in extreme environments beyond Earth. The chemistry of trench sediments also presents unanswered questions, particularly regarding the rates at which organic material is transformed and incorporated into long-term carbon storage. The deep ocean plays an important role in the global carbon cycle, and trenches may act as sites where organic carbon becomes buried for extended periods, effectively removing it from circulation in the atmosphere and surface ocean. Understanding the efficiency of this process requires careful measurements that are difficult to obtain at Hadal depths, leaving important aspects of trench chemistry still uncertain. Another area of active research involves the interaction between subducting plates and the materials carried into the mantle. Because sediments and oceanic crust descending beneath the Mariana region contain water and various chemical compounds that influence geological processes at depth, the fluids released from the descending plate can affect the composition of magmas that eventually reach volcanic arcs, linking trench processes to volcanic activity occurring far above. The exact pathways through which these materials move remain subjects of ongoing investigation. Even the physical dimensions of Challenger Deep continue to be refined, as improved measurement techniques provide increasingly accurate data. Variations in sonar calibration, reference models for sea level, and the speed of sound in seawater can produce small differences in reported depths, and researchers continue to refine these measurements in order to establish the most precise possible estimates. Although the general scale of the trench is well understood, the pursuit of accuracy reflects the scientific commitment to careful observation, even in environments that are difficult to access. The logistical challenges of studying the Mariana Trench contribute to many of these uncertainties, because expeditions require specialized ships, sophisticated equipment, and favorable weather conditions, and even well-planned missions may encounter technical difficulties. Instruments deployed at extreme depths must withstand pressures that test the limits of engineering, and recovery operations can be complicated by strong currents or equipment failures. Each successful deployment represents a significant achievement, yet the limited number of missions means that observations remain relatively sparse compared to those available for more accessible environments. The Mariana Trench therefore remains a place where knowledge accumulates gradually, shaped by individual expeditions that add small pieces to a larger picture. Scientists working in this field often describe their research as a long-term effort, in which each new discovery raises additional questions, reinforcing the sense that the deep ocean is a frontier not in the dramatic sense of conquest, but in the quieter sense of continued exploration. As our journey through the trench continues, it becomes increasingly clear that the mystery of the Mariana Trench lies not in the unknown for its own sake, but in the recognition that even the most carefully studied environments contain layers of complexity that require patience to understand. The trench represents both a destination and an ongoing investigation, a place where the limits of exploration are defined not only by technology, but also by the depth of our curiosity. In the next part of our journey, we will turn toward the story of human exploration itself, examining the remarkable engineering that has made descents into the deepest ocean possible, and the individuals who have ventured into this remote environment in order to expand our understanding of the planet. Although the Mariana Trench has existed for tens of millions of years, human awareness of its depth and significance is relatively recent, and the story of exploration represents a gradual unfolding rather than a sudden discovery. For most of human history, the deep ocean remained an abstract idea rather than a known environment, because the technology required to measure extreme depths and survive the pressures involved did not exist. Early seafarers crossed vast oceans guided by winds and currents, yet the waters beneath their ships remained almost completely unknown. And even in the 19th century, the deep sea was still widely imagined as a region where life might not exist at all. The first systematic attempts to measure ocean depth began with weighted lines lowered from ships, a method that required patience and careful handling as long lengths of rope descended slowly into the water. In 1875, during the scientific voyage of HMS Challenger, researchers recorded one of the earliest measurements suggesting extraordinary depths in the region that would later be named Challenger Deep. Using sounding lines weighted with heavy leads, they estimated depths far greater than previously recorded, revealing that parts of the ocean floor lay many kilometers below the surface. Although these early measurements lacked the precision of modern techniques, they marked the beginning of scientific awareness that the ocean contained regions far deeper than anyone had imagined. The HMS Challenger expedition represented a turning point in oceanography, because it combined careful observation with systematic data collection, laying the foundations for the scientific study of the deep ocean. Researchers aboard the vessel collected water samples, sediments, and biological specimens from various depths, demonstrating that life existed even in deep environments, and challenging earlier assumptions that the ocean floor might be barren. The expedition's findings helped establish oceanography as a scientific discipline and opened the way for future investigations into the deepest parts of the sea. Despite these early advances, it would take many decades before technology allowed humans to descend directly into the deepest ocean. The pressures involved posed enormous engineering challenges, because at depths approaching 11,000 meters, the surrounding water exerts forces that can deform or crush most materials. The engineers developing early deep-diving vessels recognized that survival depended on designing structures capable of distributing pressure evenly and minimizing points of weakness, leading to the use of spherical pressure hulls made from thick steel or specialized alloys. One of the most remarkable achievements in the history of ocean exploration occurred in January of 1960, when Jacques Picard and Don Walsh descended into Challenger Deep aboard the bathyscaphe Trieste. The Trieste differed from earlier submersibles in that it relied on a large float filled with gasoline for buoyancy, while a small steel sphere suspended beneath the float housed the crew. Gasoline was chosen because it is less dense than seawater and remains relatively incompressible, allowing the craft to maintain buoyancy even at extreme depths. The descent of the Trieste required several hours, during which the vessel moved slowly downward through the water column, while the crew monitored instruments and adjusted ballast. As they approached the trench floor, the surrounding darkness became complete, illuminated only by the submersible's external lights. Eventually, the craft settled onto the seafloor at a depth close to 11,000 meters, becoming the first manned vehicle ever to reach the deepest known part of the ocean. The crew remained at the bottom for only a short time before beginning their ascent, yet the dive demonstrated that human beings could physically reach the deepest ocean if supported by appropriate engineering. Although certain observations reported during the mission were later debated or reinterpreted, the descent of the Trieste remains one of the defining moments in deep-sea exploration, representing a combination of scientific curiosity and technological ingenuity. For more than half a century after the Trieste dive, no further manned descents reached Challenger Deep, not because interest diminished, but because the technical and financial challenges remained substantial. Building a submersible capable of surviving Hadal pressures requires specialized materials, extensive testing, and careful planning, and only a limited number of organizations possess the resources necessary to undertake such projects. In 2012, the interest in the deepest ocean was renewed when filmmaker and explorer James Cameron completed a solo descent to Challenger Deep in the submersible Deep-Sea Challenger. Unlike the Trieste, which carried 2 crew members, Cameron's vessel was designed for a single pilot and incorporated modern materials and digital imaging systems that allowed high-resolution video recording and scientific sampling. The descent took approximately 2.5 hours, and during his time on the seafloor, Cameron collected sediment samples and documented the environment in detail before returning to the surface. The Deep-Sea Challenger expedition demonstrated how advances in materials science and electronics had expanded the possibilities of deep ocean exploration, making it possible to gather more detailed data during individual dives. The mission also helped raise public awareness of the deep ocean, drawing attention to a part of the planet that remains largely hidden from everyday experience. In recent years, additional descents have been conducted using advanced submersibles designed for repeated operations at extreme depths. Among these efforts, the 5 Deeps expedition led by Victor Vescovo achieved multiple descents to Challenger Deep using the submersible limiting factor, a vehicle engineered to withstand Hadal pressures while allowing relatively frequent dives compared to earlier missions. These repeated descents have provided valuable opportunities to collect samples, conduct measurements, and refine maps of the trench floor. The development of remotely operated vehicles, or ROVs, has further expanded the ability of scientists to study deep environments without requiring human occupants inside the vehicle. ROVs are connected to surface ships by long cables that transmit power and data, allowing operators to control the vehicle and receive live video feeds from the seafloor. These systems make it possible to conduct extended observations and experiments. Although their operational depth limits often restrict their use in the deepest trenches, autonomous underwater vehicles, or AUVs, represent another important technology for deep-sea research, because they can operate without direct control from the surface, following pre-programmed routes while collecting data on seafloor topography, water chemistry, and physical conditions. UVs are particularly valuable for mapping large areas of the ocean floor. Using sonar systems to produce detailed images that reveal features too subtle to be detected by earlier techniques, mapping technologies have advanced rapidly over the past few decades, transforming our understanding of the Mariana Trench from a vague outline into a complex three-dimensional landscape. Multi-beam sonar systems mounted on research vessels emit arrays of sound pulses that reflect off the seafloor and return to receivers, allowing computers to reconstruct depth profiles across wide areas. These maps reveal the contours of the trench in remarkable detail, showing steep slopes and sediment-filled basins, and subtle variations in depth that were previously unknown. Despite these advances, the Mariana Trench remains difficult to study because of the logistical challenges involved in conducting research at such depths. Expeditions require specialized vessels capable of deploying heavy equipment safely, and operations must often be planned around weather conditions that can affect ship stability and instrument deployment. Each mission involves careful coordination between engineers, scientists, and crew members, working together to ensure that equipment functions correctly in an environment where repairs are impossible once instruments have been lowered into the water. The human experience of descending into the trench differs profoundly from exploration on land or in shallow water, because the environment outside the pressure hull is completely inaccessible without technological support. Pilots of deep-diving submersibles describe a gradual transition from daylight to darkness as the vessel descends, followed by hours spent in an environment where the outside world remains invisible except for the limited area illuminated by external lights. Communication with the surface is typically maintained through acoustic signals, allowing short messages to be exchanged despite the immense distance separating the submersible from the ship above. The return journey to the surface can take as long as the descent, and the slow pace of ascent allows the submersible to adjust gradually to decreasing pressure. When the vessel finally reaches the surface and hatches are opened, the transition from darkness and confinement to open air and daylight can feel dramatic, even though the crew has remained physically protected throughout the dive. Human exploration of the Mariana Trench represents a combination of scientific inquiry and technological achievement, yet it also highlights the limitations that continue to shape our understanding of the deep ocean. Each descent provides only a brief glimpse into an environment that extends far beyond the range of direct observation, and much of what we know about the trench comes from instruments rather than from human presence. In the final part of our journey, we will look toward the future of deep ocean research and consider how new technologies and ongoing scientific efforts may expand our knowledge of the Mariana Trench in the years to come. Even after centuries of exploration, the deepest ocean remains a frontier where discovery continues to unfold slowly, revealing a world that has existed in darkness for millions of years and that still holds many secrets waiting to be understood. As our long journey through the Mariana Trench begins to move toward the horizon of what is currently known, it becomes clear that the story of the deepest ocean is far from complete, because despite the remarkable achievements of past expeditions, the trench remains one of the least explored regions on Earth. The difficulty of reaching Hadal depths ensures that exploration proceeds slowly, yet advances in technology continue to open new possibilities for observing and understanding environments that once seemed permanently inaccessible. The future of Mariana Trench research will likely depend not on a single dramatic expedition, but on the gradual accumulation of data gathered by instruments designed to endure the pressures and isolation of the deep ocean for extended periods. One of the most important developments in recent decades has been the improvement of autonomous underwater vehicles capable of operating independently at great depths, navigating according to programmed routes while collecting detailed measurements of seafloor topography and water chemistry. These vehicles allow researchers to map large areas of the trench with increasing precision, yet revealing subtle variations in depth and terrain that help scientists reconstruct the geological processes shaping the seafloor. As battery technology and pressure-resistant electronics continue to improve, autonomous vehicles may eventually remain deployed for longer periods, gathering continuous records of environmental conditions that would be impossible to obtain through brief expeditions alone. Long-term monitoring instruments placed on the trench floor represent another important direction for future research, because they provide opportunities to observe slow processes that cannot be captured during short visits. Sensors capable of measuring temperature, pressure, seismic activity, and chemical composition can remain in place for months or years, recording variations that reveal how the deep ocean responds to events occurring both locally and at great distances. Earthquakes, submarine landslides, and seasonal changes in surface productivity may all leave detectable signatures in the data collected by these instruments, helping scientists understand the connections between deep and shallow ocean environments. Advances in imaging technology are also transforming the study of deep-sea ecosystems, allowing researchers to capture high-resolution photographs and video recordings under conditions of extreme darkness. Modern cameras designed for deep ocean use are capable of operating at very low light levels, reducing the need for bright artificial illumination that can disturb sensitive organisms. Improved imaging systems make it possible to observe behavior as well as structure, revealing how trench organisms move, feed, and interact with their surroundings in ways that were previously difficult to document. Sampling technologies continue to evolve as well, providing new methods for collecting biological and geological material from hadal depths without damaging delicate structures. Pressure-retaining sample containers allow organisms to be brought to the surface while maintaining conditions similar to those experienced at depth, enabling scientists to study biological processes under controlled laboratory conditions. These techniques help researchers investigate how pressure influences cellular function and metabolic activity, providing insights that extend beyond oceanography into broader areas of biological science. Genetic analysis has become an increasingly powerful tool for studying trench ecosystems, because even small samples of tissue or sediment can reveal the presence of organisms that might otherwise go undetected. Environmental DNA, often referred to as eDNA, can be extracted from seawater or sediment and analyzed to identify species based on fragments of genetic material released into the environment. This approach allows scientists to detect organisms without capturing them directly, providing a more complete picture of biodiversity within regions that are difficult to sample extensively. The use of genetic techniques has already revealed that trench ecosystems contain a surprising variety of microbial life, including lineages adapted specifically to high-pressure environments. Continued research in this area may help clarify how life evolves under extreme conditions and how biological systems respond to environmental stress over long timescales. means such knowledge may prove valuable not only for understanding Earth's oceans, but also for guiding the search for life in extreme environments elsewhere in the solar system. Ocean mapping initiatives are working toward the ambitious goal of producing high-resolution maps of the entire sea floor, a project that would significantly improve our understanding of ocean basins, including the Mariana region. Although satellite measurements can provide rough estimates of seafloor shape by detecting subtle variations in sea surface height caused by gravitational differences, detailed maps require sonar surveys conducted from ships or autonomous vehicles. Expanding these surveys will help identify previously unknown features within the trench and provide context for biological and geological observations. The Mariana Trench also serves as a natural laboratory for studying materials under extreme pressure, because the conditions present at Hadal depths cannot easily be replicated in conventional laboratory settings. Instruments deployed in the trench provide opportunities to observe how materials behave under sustained compression, contributing to research in fields ranging from geology to engineering. Understanding how metals, polymers, and electronic components perform under these conditions can inform the design of equipment intended for use in other extreme environments. Deep ocean research increasingly involves international collaboration, reflecting the scale and complexity of the challenges involved. Expeditions often include scientists and engineers from multiple countries working together to share expertise and resources, and data collected during these missions are frequently made available to the broader scientific community. This cooperative approach helps accelerate progress by allowing researchers to build upon each other's work rather than repeating the same measurements independently. The future of trench exploration may also include expanded use of robotic systems capable of operating in coordinated groups, with multiple vehicles working together to map terrain, collect samples, and monitor environmental conditions. Such systems could provide broader coverage than individual vehicles while allowing researchers to observe changes across larger areas of the trench. The coordinated robotic exploration represents a natural extension of current technologies and may eventually allow scientists to observe Hadal environments with a level of continuity that has never before been possible. As knowledge of the Mariana Trench continues to grow, the trench may also play an increasingly important role in understanding global environmental change, because deep-sea sediments preserve records of past ocean conditions that extend far beyond the timescales of human observation. By studying these records, scientists can reconstruct variations in climate, ocean circulation, and biological productivity over thousands or even millions of years. Such reconstructions help place modern environmental changes within a broader historical context and provide insights into how Earth's systems respond to long-term variations. Even with all these advances, it is likely that large portions of the Mariana Trench will remain unexplored for many years, because the scale of the ocean and the technical challenges involved ensure that exploration proceeds gradually. The trench represents a reminder that discovery does not always require distant travel into space, because some of the most profound mysteries remain here on Earth, hidden beneath kilometers of water where sunlight never reaches. As our journey draws toward its quiet conclusion, it becomes possible to reflect on the trench not only as a scientific subject, but as a place that expands our sense of the planet itself. The Mariana Trench reveals that Earth contains environments far more extreme and varied than everyday experience might suggest, and that life persists even in conditions once thought impossible. It also demonstrates the interconnectedness of Earth's systems, showing how materials and energy move from the surface to the deepest ocean through processes that operate continuously and often invisibly. Far above Challenger Deep, the surface ocean continues to move under the influence of winds and currents, while sunlight drives the cycles of life that ultimately sustain even the deepest ecosystems. The trench remains in darkness, shaped by geological forces and inhabited by organisms adapted to its conditions. Yet it remains connected to the rest of the planet through pathways that link shallow and deep environments into a single global system. And somewhere in the vast water column between the seafloor and the surface, particles continue their slow descent, carrying with them traces of the world above, settling gradually into sediments that will record the passage of time long after the present moment has passed. The Mariana Trench endures as one of the quietest places on Earth, a region where change unfolds slowly and where the deepest waters hold stories written across millions of years. Even after hours of imagined descent and observation, the trench remains larger than any single narrative, a reminder that exploration is never truly finished, and that the deepest parts of the ocean will continue to invite curiosity long into the future. After spending time imagining the landscape of the Mariana Trench and the organisms that inhabit it, it becomes possible to notice another dimension of this environment that is easy to overlook at first, because unlike animals or geological formations, it cannot be seen directly. The deep ocean is shaped not only by physical structures but by invisible forces that operate continuously within the water itself, including pressure, density, temperature gradients, and slow-moving currents that connect the deepest trenches to distant regions of the planet. These forces create a kind of hidden architecture within the ocean, one that governs how water moves, how heat is distributed, and how materials travel from the surface into the Hadal depths. Pressure remains the most dominant physical factor at Challenger Deep, and although it has already been described in numerical terms, the gradual increase of pressure with depth creates a continuous transformation in the physical properties of seawater itself. Water under extreme pressure becomes slightly denser, and its compressibility, although small, is measurable across the immense vertical distance between the surface and the trench floor. These subtle changes influence how sound travels, how currents flow, and how suspended particles behave as they descend through the water column. Temperature variations in the deep ocean are relatively small compared to those at the surface, yet even slight differences in temperature can influence the density of seawater and contribute to the slow circulation patterns that distribute heat across the global ocean. The deep Pacific is filled largely with cold water that originated near the polar regions, where surface waters cooled and sank before beginning journeys that may take centuries to complete. This deep circulation forms part of a planetary scale system, sometimes described as the ocean's conveyor belt, in which water masses move gradually between ocean basins, carrying dissolved gases and nutrients along paths that extend across thousands of kilometers. The Mariana Trench lies within this global circulation network, and although the trench itself does not generate major currents, it receives water that has traveled long distances through the deep Pacific. The age of this water can be estimated through chemical traces such as dissolved carbon isotopes and oxygen concentrations, revealing that some deep waters have remained isolated from the atmosphere for hundreds or even thousands of years before eventually returning to the surface through slow upwelling processes. In this way, the trench participates in a global cycle that links distant regions of the ocean into a continuous system of movement and exchange. Within the trench, currents tend to be weak compared to those near the surface, yet even slow flows can influence the distribution of sediments and organic material. Particles drifting downward may be carried sideways by gentle currents before reaching the sea floor, creating patterns of accumulation that vary from one part of the trench to another. Over long periods, these patterns contribute to differences in sediment thickness and composition that reflect the interaction between gravity and water movement. The descent of organic particles through the water column involves processes that extend across both biological and physical domains, because the formation of marine snow depends partly on the aggregation of microscopic organisms and partly on the mechanical interactions that cause particles to stick together as they drift downward. These aggregates vary in size and density, and their sinking speeds depend on the balance between gravitational forces pulling them downward and drag forces resisting their motion through the water. Some particles descend slowly enough to be consumed by organisms living in mid-water depths before they can reach the sea floor, while others sink more rapidly and deliver nutrients directly to abyssal and hadal ecosystems. This filtering process shapes the availability of energy at different depths, influencing the distribution of organisms throughout the water column. The Mariana Trench represents the final destination for many of these particles, where organic material accumulates after long journeys through the ocean. Sound propagation in the deep ocean provides another example of how physical conditions shape the environment in ways that are not immediately visible. Sound waves travel through seawater at speeds influenced by temperature, pressure, and salinity, and variations in these properties create layers within the ocean that can bend sound paths and allow acoustic signals to travel long distances. Certain depth ranges act as channels in which sound can propagate efficiently, allowing noises produced by earthquakes or marine animals to be detected far from their sources. Hydrophones placed in deep waters have recorded sounds originating from events occurring hundreds or even thousands of kilometers away, demonstrating how effectively sound can travel through the ocean interior. These recordings provide valuable information about geological activity and marine life, yet they also reveal the vast scale of the ocean environment, where events separated by great distances remain connected through the physical properties of seawater. Another aspect of deep ocean physics involves the slow deformation of sediments under their own weight, a process that occurs gradually as layers accumulate over time. Sediment grains rearrange themselves under pressure, reducing the spaces between particles and increasing the density of the seabed. This compaction influences how fluids move through sediments and how chemical reactions proceed within buried layers, affecting the long-term storage of organic carbon and other materials. Chemical gradients within sediments create microenvironments where microbial activity varies with depth, producing zones in which different metabolic processes dominate. Oxygen present near the sediment surface is gradually consumed by microbes, giving way to regions where other chemical reactions take place, including processes involving sulfate and methane. These chemical transitions form part of a complex system that governs how organic matter is transformed and preserved within the trench. Even the gravitational field of the Earth contributes subtly to the structure of the trench environment, because variations in the density of underlying rocks influence local gravity, which in turn affects the shape of the sea surface above. Satellite measurements capable of detecting minute variations in sea surface height have provided indirect information about seafloor topography, allowing scientists to identify trenches and ridges long before detailed sonar maps became available. These measurements illustrate how the trench interacts with broader planetary systems extending from the Earth's interior to the surface ocean. As time passes in this imagined descent, the Mariana Trench begins to feel less like an isolated location and more like a convergence point where physical processes intersect, including tectonic motion, ocean circulation, sediment transport, and biological activity. Each of these processes operates according to its own timescale, yet together they create the conditions that define the deepest ocean environment. That the trench therefore represents not only an extreme habitat but also a meeting place of planetary systems, where forces originating in the Earth's mantle, the polar oceans, the atmosphere and the biosphere all leave their subtle marks on a landscape hidden beneath kilometers of water. Understanding this environment requires patience and careful observation, because the processes involved unfold slowly and often invisibly, revealing themselves only through measurements collected over long periods. In the next part of our journey, we will pause the descent for a moment and look at the trench not only as a destination, but as a creation, because the Mariana Trench exists for a reason written into the planet's geology, and understanding that reason makes the place feel even more profound. We will explore subduction, plate motion, the slow bending of oceanic crust, and the way Earth's internal heat and mechanical forces shape the surface world, producing trenches, earthquakes, volcanic arcs, and the deep-sea landscapes that remain hidden from everyday life. And as we do, we'll keep the same pace, the same calm, narrative flow, letting the science feel like a gentle current rather than a lecture, because the goal is not to rush toward facts, but to let facts become part of a larger, immersive story. As our slow descent into the depths of the Mariana Trench continues, it becomes natural to wonder how such an immense structure could have formed at all. Because the trench is not simply an accidental depression in the seafloor, but the visible expression of forces that have been shaping the Earth for hundreds of millions of years. To understand why the Mariana Trench exists, we must gradually shift our attention away from the water itself and toward the deeper structure of the planet, toward the restless outer shell of the Earth where continents and ocean basins move with a patience so immense that the motion becomes almost invisible within the span of a human lifetime. As the surface grows more distant above, the water would retain its clarity at first, illuminated by broad shafts of sunlight that penetrate through the upper layers and reveal drifting particles suspended in the currents. These tiny fragments of organic material and mineral dust would appear to hang motionless at a distance, yet closer observation would reveal that they are constantly moving, yet carried by currents too gentle to feel directly yet persistent enough to shape their slow journeys downward. Fish and other animals inhabiting these upper waters would move with apparent ease, their bodies adapted to pressures still close to those experienced at the surface, and the descent through this region might feel almost peaceful, as though drifting through an open and sunlit space. Gradually, however, the brightness would begin to soften, And the clear illumination of the surface waters would give way to dimmer tones as sunlight becomes scattered and absorbed by the surrounding water. Colours would change subtly, first losing the warm tones of red and orange before settling into cooler shades dominated by blue and grey. Objects that once appeared sharply defined would become less distinct with distance, and the sense of depth would grow stronger as the visible range narrows and the water takes on a faintly shadowed appearance. By the time the descent reaches the twilight zone, the environment would begin to feel quieter in a way that goes beyond sound, because the visual cues associated with open daylight would have largely disappeared. The remaining light would resemble a permanent dusk, with the surface now far above and visible only as a faint glow that becomes less recognizable as distance increases. Animals inhabiting these depths would reflect the dimness around them, yet many possessing large eyes adapted to capture the faintest traces of light, while others would appear almost invisible, their bodies darkened or transparent to avoid detection in a region where concealment offers survival advantages. Continuing downward, the final traces of natural light would eventually fade completely, leaving an environment defined by darkness rather than shadow. At this point, the descent would enter a realm where vision depends entirely on artificial illumination, or on the faint bioluminescent signals produced by living organisms. Without lights, the surroundings would appear uniformly black, and orientation would rely on instruments rather than visual reference points. With lights, however, a small region of the water would come into view, revealing particles drifting steadily downward and occasionally reflecting brief flashes of movement as animals pass through the illuminated area. The sensation of depth would grow increasingly abstract as the descent continues, because the distances involved extend far beyond those encountered in ordinary experience. Looking upward would reveal nothing but darkness beyond the reach of the lights, while looking downward would show only the slowly approaching seafloor still kilometers away. The awareness of pressure, although not directly felt within a protected vessel, would remain present as a conceptual understanding, because the surrounding water would now exert forces far greater than those experienced anywhere on land. Time itself might begin to feel different during such a descent, because the steady motion downward would unfold gradually over several hours without the familiar markers of changing light or shifting scenery that usually define the passage of time. Instruments would record the increasing depth and pressure with precise numerical values, yet the environment outside would change only slowly, creating a sense of continuity rather than progression. The descent would feel less like a journey between distinct places and more like a continuous transition into a deeper state of the same environment. Passing through abyssal depths, the water would appear almost motionless, with only the slow fall of marine snow providing visible evidence of movement. These particles would drift downward at different speeds depending on their size and density, some settling quickly, while others remain suspended for extended periods before eventually reaching the seafloor. The illuminated region around the vessel would resemble a gentle snowfall suspended in darkness, with individual particles appearing and disappearing as they pass through the beam of light. Approaching the Hadal zone, the sense of isolation would deepen as the descent enters a region visited only rarely by human observers. The steep slopes of the trench walls might come into view as faint outlines beyond the illuminated area, descending into darkness below and rising into darkness above. A sediment sliding slowly down these slopes over long periods would contribute to the gradual reshaping of the trench floor, yet the motion would be too slow to observe directly, leaving only the suggestion of geological activity recorded in the structure of the landscape. As the vessel nears the trench floor, the illuminated sediments would begin to resolve into textures and patterns shaped by the slow accumulation of particles over thousands of years. The surface might appear smooth at first glance, yet closer observation would reveal subtle variations created by burrowing organisms and gentle currents. Small depressions and ridges would reflect the activity of animals moving through the mud, while scattered objects might represent fragments of organic material that have settled from above. The moment of reaching the seafloor would not involve a dramatic impact, but rather a gradual slowing as the vessel approaches and finally rests upon the sediments. The lights would reveal a limited area of the trench floor extending outward in all directions, beyond which darkness would resume almost immediately. The environment would appear quiet and stable, with only the slow movement of drifting particles and occasional animals providing evidence of life. Remaining at the bottom for a period of time would allow the observer to notice subtle details that might be overlooked during the descent, including the steady accumulation of particles settling onto the sediments and the gradual appearance of organisms drawn toward disturbances created by the vessel's arrival. Amphipods might approach cautiously at first before gathering more closely, while other animals remain partially buried within the sediments until conditions appear safe. Looking outward into the darkness beyond the illuminated region would emphasize the scale of the trench environment, because the visible area would represent only a tiny fraction of the surrounding landscape. Beyond the reach of the lights, the trench floor would extend for kilometers, forming a hidden terrain that remains largely unexplored despite modern technology. Eventually the time would come to begin the ascent, and the vessel would rise slowly from the sea floor, leaving behind the sediments and the organisms that inhabit them. The trench floor would fade into darkness once again as the distance increases and the long journey upward would begin, reversing the sequence of environments encountered during the descent. The return to sunlight would unfold gradually over hours, with faint glimmers appearing first in the distance before eventually expanding into recognizable brightness. By the time the surface is reached once more, the familiar world of air and light would return in full clarity, yet the memory of the descent would remain as a reminder that beneath the calm surface of the ocean lies a vast hidden environment extending far deeper than everyday experience suggests. And even after returning to the surface, the Mariana Trench would continue to exist in quiet darkness below, unchanged by the brief visit and continuing its slow processes far beyond the reach of observation. One of the most unusual aspects of the Mariana Trench is not immediately visible in its physical structure or biological inhabitants, but instead emerges from the way time itself seems to unfold within the deep ocean, because the rhythms that define life at the surface, the alternation of day and night, the changing of seasons and the rapid cycles of weather, have little influence in the Adal depths. The trench exists within a form of environmental stability that extends across years, centuries and even geological ages, creating a setting where change occurs slowly and where events that would seem dramatic elsewhere become part of a gradual and continuous process. At the surface of the ocean, sunlight drives daily cycles that influence temperature, currents and biological activity, producing patterns that repeat predictably over the course of each day. In the Mariana Trench, however, darkness remains constant, and organisms do not rely on the rising and setting of the sun to regulate their behavior. Instead, biological rhythms are shaped more by internal processes and by the sporadic arrival of food than by external cycles of light. The absence of sunlight creates a world where time is measured less by visible change and more by the slow progression of physical and chemical processes that continue without interruption. The water occupying the deepest parts of the Pacific Ocean often began its journey near the surface in distant regions, sometimes near polar latitudes where cold temperatures increased its density and caused it to sink. Once these water masses entered the deep ocean, they began long and gradual journeys through the global circulation system, moving at speeds that might carry them only a few centimeters per second. Over the course of centuries, this water travels across ocean basins, carrying dissolved gases and nutrients that eventually influence ecosystems far from their origin. By the time such water reaches the Mariana Trench, it may have been isolated from the atmosphere for hundreds of years, forming part of a slow planetary circulation that operates on timescales rarely encountered in everyday life. The sediments accumulating on the trench floor provide another record of time measured in gradual increments, because each layer represents particles that have settled slowly from the water above. In many deep-sea environments, sediment accumulates at rates of only a few millimeters per 1,000 years, meaning that a layer just 1 centimeter thick may represent thousands of years of deposition. Over millions of years, these layers build into sequences that preserve evidence of past ocean conditions, including variations in temperature, productivity, and the composition of the atmosphere. Scientists studying sediment cores extracted from deep-sea environments analyze the chemical composition and microscopic fossils contained within these layers, using them as records of environmental change extending far into the past. Variations in the abundance of certain microorganisms, for example, can indicate changes in surface productivity that occurred thousands of years ago, while shifts in isotopic ratios may reveal fluctuations in ocean temperature or global ice volume. The sediments of the Mariana Trench therefore function as a kind of archive, preserving information about Earth's history in a form that accumulates gradually and remains undisturbed by the rapid changes occurring at the surface. Geological processes shaping the trench operate on even longer timescales, because the movement of tectonic plates occurs at speeds that may appear almost negligible within the span of a human lifetime. The Pacific Plate continues to descend beneath the Mariana region at rates measured in centimeters per year, a motion that might seem insignificant if observed over a single decade, yet becomes enormous when extended across millions of years. Over geological time, entire sections of oceanic crust are carried downward into the mantle, while new crust forms at spreading ridges elsewhere, maintaining a continuous cycle that reshapes the ocean basins. Earthquakes within the Mariana region represent brief interruptions in this slow geological progression, releasing energy accumulated through the gradual deformation of the Earth's crust. Although earthquakes may appear sudden from a human perspective, they represent moments within a longer sequence of stress accumulation and release that extends across decades or centuries. The trench therefore embodies both gradual change and occasional disturbance, combining stability with the potential for sudden events that alter the seafloor in localized ways. Biological time within the trench also unfolds differently from that in more productive environments, because limited energy availability often leads to slower growth and longer lifespans among deep-sea organisms. Some species of deep-sea animals grow gradually over many years, conserving energy by maintaining low metabolic rates that allow them to survive in conditions where food is scarce. This slow pace of life reflects the constraints imposed by the environment, where opportunities for feeding may occur irregularly and where survival depends on efficiency rather than rapid reproduction. Microbial communities within trench sediments operate continuously over long periods, carrying out chemical transformations that proceed gradually yet cumulatively influence the composition of the environment. Microbes break down organic matter arriving from the surface, releasing nutrients and gases that participate in cycles extending far beyond the trench itself. Although individual microbial cells may live only briefly, their collective activity persists indefinitely, maintaining processes that continue as long as organic material and suitable conditions remain available. Even the materials used in deep-sea exploration reflect the influence of time in the trench environment, because instruments deployed at Hadal depths must endure long periods under extreme pressure without maintenance or repair. Engineers designing such equipment must account for the slow effects of corrosion, pressure-induced deformation, and mechanical fatigue, yet ensuring that instruments remain functional despite conditions that challenge the durability of most materials. Long-term monitoring devices may remain on the seafloor for years before being recovered, recording data that reveal patterns invisible during short visits. From a broader perspective, the Mariana Trench illustrates how different parts of the Earth operate according to different temporal rhythms, with rapid changes occurring at the surface while deeper environments evolve more slowly. Weather patterns may shift within hours or days. Ecosystems near the surface may change over seasons or decades, and geological structures such as trenches evolve across millions of years. The trench therefore represents one end of a spectrum in which time stretches outward into scales that exceed direct human experience. Imagining the trench over long periods makes it possible to see how stable the environment remains despite the slow processes shaping it. Thousands of years from now, sediments will have thickened slightly, plates will have shifted by small distances, and generations of organisms will have lived and died within the same dark waters. Yet the overall character of the trench will likely remain recognizable, defined by depth, pressure, and darkness in ways that persist across immense spans of time. As this extended journey through the Mariana Trench continues, it becomes increasingly clear that the trench is not simply a location, but a long-term process, a place where geological, chemical, and biological systems operate together across scales that connect the present moment to distant past and future. In the next part of our exploration, we will consider how the Mariana Trench compares to other deep trenches around the world, and how these environments together form a network of extreme habitats that reveal the broader patterns of Earth's oceanic structure. Although the Mariana Trench is the deepest known location in the global ocean, and often stands as the symbol of extreme depth, it is not alone in forming the hidden network of Hadal environments that exist across the planet. Scattered along the boundaries of tectonic plates are dozens of deep ocean trenches that are each created by the slow descent of one section of the Earth's crust beneath another, and together these trenches form a system of narrow and elongated habitats extending across thousands of kilometers beneath the ocean surface. Understanding the Mariana Trench becomes easier when it is seen as part of this broader pattern, because the processes that created it are repeated in other regions where tectonic plates converge and oceanic crust begins its long journey into the mantle. One of the deepest trenches after the Mariana is the Tonga Trench in the southwestern Pacific Ocean, where depths approach those found in Challenger Deep, and where subduction occurs at relatively rapid rates compared to many other plate boundaries. The Tonga region represents one of the most tectonically active areas on Earth, with frequent earthquakes and volcanic activity marking the boundary between plates that continue to shift slowly but persistently. The steep descent of the Pacific Plate beneath the Tonga region produces depths nearly comparable to those of the Mariana Trench, illustrating how variations in plate age, density and motion influence the shape of oceanic trenches. Farther east lies the Kermadec Trench, another deep subduction zone extending northward from New Zealand, where geological processes similar to those of the Mariana region create steep seafloor slopes and deep basins. Although slightly shallower than the deepest portions of the Mariana Trench, the Kermadec Trench hosts hadal environments that support organisms adapted to extreme pressure and darkness, demonstrating that the biological patterns observed in the Mariana region are part of a larger system rather than isolated phenomena. Along the western coast of South America, the Peru-Chile Trench marks the boundary where the Nazca Plate descends beneath the South American continent, producing a deep offshore trench associated with the formation of the Andes Mountains. This trench differs from the Mariana in that it lies adjacent to a continental margin rather than a volcanic island arc, yet the underlying process of subduction remains the same, as sediments carried by rivers from the continent accumulate along parts of the trench, creating environments influenced by both geological and terrestrial processes. In the northern Pacific, the Kuril-Kamchatka Trench extends along the boundary between the Pacific Plate and the Eurasian Plate, forming another deep region shaped by subduction and seismic activity. This trench experiences frequent earthquakes, reflecting the ongoing motion of tectonic plates in a region where geological forces remain active. Although less widely known than the Mariana Trench, it represents another example of how plate boundaries create extreme depths beneath the ocean surface. Together, these trenches form what scientists describe as the Hadal Zone, a collection of environments deeper than 6,000 meters that share certain physical characteristics, while also displaying important differences related to local geology and ocean circulation. Each trench acts as a partially isolated habitat where organisms evolve under similar constraints, yet may develop distinct adaptations reflecting regional conditions. The Hadal Zone therefore represents not a single ecosystem, but a mosaic of environments connected by common physical principles. The isolation of trenches from one another creates opportunities for evolutionary divergence, because populations separated by thousands of kilometers may follow different evolutionary paths over long periods. Genetic studies of hadal organisms have revealed that even closely related species from different trenches often display measurable differences, suggesting that migration between trenches occurs only rarely or under specific conditions. These patterns provide valuable insights into how life adapts to extreme environments and how geographic separation influences biological diversity. Ocean circulation plays an important role in connecting trench environments despite their isolation, because deep currents carry water masses between ocean basins over long periods. These currents transport dissolved nutrients and gases that influence conditions within trenches, helping maintain the chemical balance necessary for life. Although organisms themselves may not easily move between trenches, the water in which they live participates in global cycles that link distant regions of the ocean into a unified system. The study of multiple trenches has revealed both similarities and differences in sediment composition, biological communities, and geological structure, allowing scientists to identify patterns that apply across the Hadal zone, as well as features unique to individual regions. Some trenches receive large amounts of sediment from nearby continents, while others remain relatively isolated from terrestrial influences, resulting in differences in nutrient availability and ecosystem structure. These variations illustrate how local conditions interact with global processes to shape deep ocean environments. Comparisons between trenches have also helped clarify the role of plate tectonics in determining trench depth and structure, because trenches associated with older and denser oceanic crust tend to reach greater depths than those formed by younger crust. The Mariana Trench represents an extreme example of this pattern, where the age and density of the Pacific Plate contribute to the exceptional depth of Challenger Deep, and other trenches display intermediate depths reflecting the specific characteristics of the plates involved. Despite these differences, all trenches share certain defining features, including steep slopes, high pressure, near freezing temperatures, and permanent darkness. These conditions create environments where life must adapt to similar challenges regardless of geographic location, leading to convergent evolutionary patterns in which unrelated organisms develop comparable solutions to the problems posed by extreme depth. The existence of multiple trenches around the world also emphasizes how small the Hadal zone is in terms of total area, compared to the vast extent of the abyssal plains. Although trenches represent the deepest parts of the ocean, they occupy only a tiny fraction of the seafloor, forming narrow ribbons scattered along plate boundaries. This limited area contributes to the relative scarcity of Hadal ecosystems and increases the scientific value of each trench as a site for studying extreme environments. As we imagine the Mariana Trench within this broader global context, it becomes clear that the deepest place on Earth is part of a larger system of geological and biological processes extending across the ocean basins. The trench stands as the most extreme expression of conditions that occur in lesser form elsewhere, thus providing a natural laboratory for studying the limits of pressure tolerance and the interactions between geology and biology. In the next part of our journey, we will explore how scientists measure and map extreme depths, examining the techniques used to determine the precise shape and dimensions of the Mariana Trench, and the technologies that allow researchers to visualize environments hidden beneath kilometers of water. Long before human beings could descend into the Mariana Trench, the first challenge facing scientists was simply determining how deep the ocean might be, because the vast distances separating the surface from the seafloor made direct observation impossible with early technology. Measuring the depth of the ocean required methods that could function across kilometers of water while remaining accurate enough to distinguish between ordinary depths and the extreme depressions that form trenches. The gradual refinement of these techniques represents one of the quiet achievements of oceanographic science, transforming the deep ocean from an unknown void into a mapped environment whose contours can now be studied in remarkable detail. The earliest depth measurements relied on sounding lines, long lengths of rope or cable weighted at one end and lowered slowly from ships until they reached the seafloor. Sailors performing these measurements had to manage hundreds or even thousands of meters of line, while ensuring that the weight descended vertically rather than drifting with currents, a task requiring patience and careful technique. When the line finally reached the bottom, the length paid out would be measured and recorded, providing an estimate of the depth below the vessel. These measurements were labor-intensive and often uncertain, because currents could carry the line sideways and stretching of the rope under its own weight introduced additional errors. Despite these limitations, sounding lines revealed that some regions of the ocean were far deeper than previously imagined, and the measurements obtained during 19th century expeditions provided the first indications of trenches such as the Mariana. The HMS Challenger expedition of the 1870s conducted numerous soundings across the world's oceans, establishing the basic outlines of deep basins and demonstrating that the sea floor varied dramatically rather than forming a uniform plane. These early observations laid the groundwork for future mapping efforts, even though the precision of individual measurements remained limited. The development of echo sounding in the early 20th century transformed ocean depth measurement by replacing physical lines with acoustic signals. Echo sounders operate by transmitting pulses of sound downward into the water and measuring the time required for the echoes to return after reflecting from the sea floor. Because the speed of sound in seawater can be estimated with reasonable accuracy based on temperature, salinity, and pressure, the travel time of the sound waves can be converted into depth measurements with far greater efficiency than was possible using sounding lines. Early echo sounders transmitted single beams of sound directly beneath the ship, producing a continuous record of depth along the vessel's path, but leaving large areas between tracks unmapped. Even with this limitation, echo sounding revealed that trenches possess steep slopes and narrow profiles that could not easily be detected through isolated measurements. The ability to record continuous depth profiles allowed scientists to visualize the general shape of trenches and ocean basins, providing insights into geological processes operating beneath the sea. Modern multi-beam sonar systems represent a further advance in ocean mapping, using arrays of sound transmitters and receivers to measure depths across wide swathes of seafloor simultaneously. Instead of recording depth along a single line, multi-beam systems produce detailed maps covering areas many kilometers wide, allowing researchers to reconstruct three-dimensional models of underwater landscapes. These maps reveal features such as ridges, slopes, and sediment-filled basins with a level of detail unimaginable to early oceanographers. The accuracy of sonar measurements depends on careful calibration and on accurate knowledge of the speed of sound in seawater, which varies with temperature, pressure, and salinity. Oceanographers therefore collect measurements of water properties throughout the water column, using instruments lowered from ships to record temperature and salinity profiles that allow sound speed to be calculated precisely. Corrections based on these measurements ensure that sonar data accurately represent the true shape of the seafloor. Even with advanced sonar technology, measuring the exact depth of Challenger Deep remains a complex task, because small variations in measurement methods can produce differences of several meters. factors such as tidal variations, instrumental precision, and the reference level used for sea surface height all influence reported depth values. As a result, depth estimates for Challenger Deep are typically expressed within ranges rather than as single fixed numbers, reflecting the inherent uncertainties involved in measuring extreme depths. Pressure measurements provide another method for determining depth because the pressure exerted by seawater increases predictably with depth. Instruments designed to withstand extreme pressure can record values that correspond to specific depths when calibrated carefully. These measurements complement sonar data and provide independent confirmation of depth estimates obtained through acoustic methods. Mapping the Mariana Trench has revealed that Challenger Deep is not a single point but a region containing several basins with slightly different depths, separated by ridges and slopes formed through geological processes. Some basins reach greater depth than others, and identifying the deepest location requires surveys with high spatial resolution. Continued mapping efforts have refined our understanding of the trench's structure, revealing subtle variations that reflect the dynamic processes shaping the seafloor. Satellite measurements have contributed indirectly to ocean mapping by detecting variations in the height of the sea surface caused by differences in gravitational attraction. Regions where dense rocks lie beneath the seafloor exert slightly stronger gravitational pull, drawing water toward them and creating small bulges in the ocean surface, while less dense regions produce slight depressions. Although these variations measure only a few centimeters in height, they can be detected by satellites and used to infer the presence of underwater features such as trenches and ridges. Satellite-derived maps provide global coverage, but lack the resolution required for detailed studies, making them complementary to sonar surveys rather than replacements. By combining satellite data with ship-based measurements, scientists can develop comprehensive maps that reveal both large-scale patterns and fine structural details of the ocean floor. Advances in computing have played a crucial role in modern ocean mapping, because the vast quantities of data produced by sonar systems must be processed and interpreted to produce usable maps. Sophisticated algorithms correct for instrument motion, water properties, and signal distortions, transforming raw acoustic measurements into accurate representations of seafloor topography. These digital models allow researchers to visualize the trench from multiple perspectives, revealing patterns that might not be apparent from individual measurements. Detailed maps of the Mariana Trench have improved our understanding of how geological processes shape the seafloor, showing evidence of faulting, sediment transport, and structural deformation associated with subduction. These maps provide context for biological studies by identifying regions where sediments accumulate or where slopes may influence the distribution of organisms. The process of measuring the deepest ocean illustrates the interplay between technology and discovery, because each improvement in measurement capability reveals new details that prompt further questions. What once appeared as a simple deep depression now emerges as a complex landscape shaped by forces operating over millions of years. In the next part of our journey, we will explore the role of the Mariana Trench in Earth's global systems, examining how the deepest ocean influences climate, carbon storage, and the long-term stability of the planet. Although the Mariana Trench might appear at first to be an isolated environment separated from the rest of the world by kilometers of water and permanent darkness, it is in fact deeply connected to the broader systems that regulate the functioning of the planet, participating in cycles that link the atmosphere, the oceans, and the Earth's interior into a continuous network of exchange. The deepest trench is not merely a remote geological feature but a part of the global system through which matter and energy move slowly yet persistently, shaping conditions at the surface as well as in the depths. One of the most important ways in which the Mariana Trench participates in global processes involves the cycling of carbon, an element that plays a central role in regulating Earth's climate over long timescales. Carbon enters the ocean primarily through the absorption of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and through the biological activity of phytoplankton that convert dissolved carbon into organic matter using sunlight. When these microscopic organisms die or are consumed, fragments of organic material begin to sink through the water column as marine snow, carrying carbon downward into deeper layers of the ocean. Most of this sinking material is recycled before reaching the seafloor, consumed by organisms living in mid-water depths, or decomposed by microbes that release carbon back into the water in dissolved form. A smaller fraction continues downward into abyssal and hadal environments, where it may become buried within sediments that accumulate gradually over time. The Mariana Trench represents one of the deepest final destinations for this material, a place where organic carbon can be incorporated into sediments that may remain undisturbed for thousands or even millions of years. Over geological timescales, some of this carbon becomes part of the subducting oceanic crust that descends into the mantle beneath the Mariana region. As sediments and oceanic crust are carried downward, carbon-containing compounds are subjected to increasing temperature and pressure, eventually participating in chemical reactions that release carbon dioxide or incorporate carbon into mantle materials. Some of this carbon later returns to the surface through volcanic activity, completing a long-term cycle that connects the deepest ocean trenches to processes occurring far above the seafloor. This geological carbon cycle operates far more slowly than the exchanges occurring between the atmosphere and the surface ocean, yet it plays a crucial role in maintaining the long-term balance of carbon within the Earth system. Trenches such as the Mariana represent entry points through which carbon and other elements return to the Earth's interior, helping regulate atmospheric composition over millions of years. The trench also participates indirectly in the distribution of heat across the planet through its role within deep ocean circulation. Cold waters formed near polar regions sink into the deep ocean and eventually spread through the Pacific Basin, carrying thermal energy that influences global climate patterns. Although the Mariana Trench itself does not drive these currents, it forms part of the deep pathways through which water masses move slowly across ocean basins, contributing to the overall structure of ocean circulation. Dissolved oxygen carried by deep currents supports biological activity within hadal ecosystems, because organisms living in the trench depend on oxygen delivered from distant surface waters. The gradual consumption of oxygen by deep sea organisms and microbes reflects the balance between supply through circulation and demand through biological processes. Measurements of oxygen concentration provide insights into the age and movement of deep water masses, revealing connections between distant regions of the ocean. Nutrient cycles also link the Mariana Trench to the broader ocean system, because elements such as nitrogen and phosphorus participate in transformations that begin at the surface and continue into the deepest waters. Organic matter arriving at the trench floor contains these nutrients, which are gradually released through microbial decomposition and may eventually re-enter ocean circulation. The recycling of nutrients helps sustain biological productivity in regions far from the trench and are illustrating the interconnected nature of ocean ecosystems. The trench also influences geological processes beyond its immediate location because the subduction occurring beneath the Mariana region contributes to the long-term evolution of the Earth's crust. As oceanic plates descend into the mantle, they transport water and minerals that affect the melting behavior of mantle rocks, influencing the formation of volcanic arcs and the composition of magma generated at depth. The volcanic islands associated with the Mariana Arc represent visible expressions of processes that begin deep beneath the trench, linking the deepest ocean to surface landscapes. Earthquakes generated within the subduction zone release energy accumulated through plate motion, contributing to the global pattern of seismic activity that reflects the dynamic nature of the Earth's crust. Although most earthquakes in the Mariana region occur deep beneath the sea floor and do not produce large surface disturbances, they represent part of the ongoing adjustment of tectonic plates that continues across geological time. The trench also serves as a natural archive, preserving evidence of environmental conditions extending far into the past, because sediments accumulating on the trench floor record variations in ocean productivity, climate, and atmospheric composition. Scientists studying these sediments can reconstruct aspects of Earth's environmental history, providing insights into how climate systems have changed over thousands or millions of years. Even the discovery of human-derived materials within the trench illustrates the connection between this remote environment and the rest of the planet, because pollutants transported through the ocean eventually reach depths that once seemed beyond human influence. The presence of microplastics and industrial chemicals in hadal organisms demonstrates how materials introduced at the surface can spread through ocean systems and become incorporated into ecosystems far removed from their sources. Understanding these connections helps place the Mariana Trench within a broader perspective, in which the deepest ocean is not isolated but integrated into the functioning of the Earth as a whole. The trench represents one extreme within a continuum of environments extending from the atmosphere to the mantle, and studying it provides insights into processes that operate across the entire planet. As this extended journey through the Mariana Trench continues, the environment begins to feel less like a distant curiosity and more like an essential part of the world we inhabit, a reminder that Earth's systems extend far beyond the limits of everyday experience. The trench remains hidden beneath kilometers of water, yet its influence reaches outward through cycles of matter and energy that connect deep and shallow environments into a unified planetary system. In the next part of our exploration, we will move into some of the most surprising physical extremes found in the Mariana Trench, examining in greater detail the extraordinary conditions that define life and matter at the greatest depths on Earth. As our long journey through the Mariana Trench reaches its final stretch, it becomes possible to see the deepest ocean not only as a scientific subject, but as a place that reshapes the way we think about the planet itself. Because few environments reveal the scale and complexity of Earth as clearly as a descent into the deepest waters. The trench exists in permanent darkness, under pressures so immense that even our strongest materials must be carefully designed to endure them. Yet it remains a natural part of the same world that includes forests, mountains, cities and skies, filled with clouds drifting in sunlight. The deepest point on Earth does not announce itself with dramatic features or sudden changes, because the character of Challenger Deep is defined more by stillness than by spectacle. The seafloor lies quietly beneath kilometers of water, shaped by slow geological processes and covered by sediments that accumulate grain by grain over spans of time far exceeding human history. In this environment, change occurs gradually, and the passage of centuries may leave only subtle traces visible to careful observation. The organisms that inhabit the trench represent forms of life adapted to conditions that would once have seemed incompatible with survival, and their presence expands our understanding of what life can endure. Soft-bodied fish moving through the darkness, amphipods searching the sediments, and microbes transforming organic matter all form part of a living system that persists without sunlight and with only limited supplies of energy arriving from above. Each organism exists as part of a network shaped by scarcity and stability, where survival depends on efficiency and patience rather than abundance. The Mariana Trench also stands as a reminder of the limits of human exploration, because despite centuries of scientific progress, only a small number of people have ever reached the deepest parts of the ocean directly. Most knowledge of the trench comes from instruments and remote observations, and large areas remain unexplored even today. The difficulty of reaching such depths ensures that discovery proceeds slowly, leaving open the possibility that future expeditions will reveal new species, new geological features, and new insights into the functioning of deep ocean environments. The technological achievements that have made trench exploration possible reflect the ingenuity required to extend human observation into environments far beyond ordinary experience. Pressure-resistant vessels, sonar mapping systems, and autonomous vehicles allow researchers to study conditions that would otherwise remain inaccessible, demonstrating how scientific curiosity drives the development of new tools and methods. Each descent into the trench represents a meeting between human invention and natural extremes, producing knowledge that expands our understanding of the planet. Yet even with advanced technology, the trench remains larger than any individual expedition, and the majority of its depths have never been observed directly. The scale of the ocean ensures that exploration will continue far into the future, with new discoveries emerging gradually as instruments improve and research expands. The Mariana Trench therefore represents not a completed chapter in science but an ongoing story, one that continues to unfold as long as curiosity leads people to study the hidden regions of the Earth. Far above Challenger Deep, sunlight continues to drive the cycles of life in the surface ocean, where winds create waves and currents carry nutrients across vast distances. Phytoplankton drift in illuminated waters, they're converting sunlight into energy that ultimately sustains ecosystems throughout the ocean, including those in the deepest trenches. The connection between surface and depth remains constant, maintained through the slow descent of organic particles and the circulation of water masses that move across the globe. In the deep ocean, these processes unfold at a pace that feels almost timeless, because the absence of sunlight and the stability of environmental conditions create a setting where change is measured in centuries rather than days. Sediments settle quietly onto the trench floor, microbes continue their chemical work, and generations of organisms live and die in darkness without ever encountering the light of the sun. If we imagine the Mariana Trench thousands of years into the future, it is likely that the essential character of the environment will remain much the same as it is today. Tectonic plates will have shifted slightly, sediments will have accumulated a little more thickness, and countless organisms will have lived out their quiet lives in the depths. Yet the trench will still exist as the deepest part of the ocean, defined by pressure and darkness in ways that persist across geological time. The deepest ocean invites a kind of reflection that extends beyond science, because it reminds us that much of the planet remains hidden from everyday experience. Beneath the familiar surface world lies an environment vast enough to contain mountains, valleys, and ecosystems of its own, yet silent and unseen except by the instruments and explorers that occasionally descend into its depths. The existence of such places suggests that Earth still holds mysteries not because they are deliberately concealed, but because the scale of the planet exceeds the limits of ordinary observation. And perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the Mariana Trench is not simply that it is deep, but that it exists quietly beneath waters that appear ordinary from above, reminding us that even familiar places may conceal extraordinary realities just beyond the reach of immediate perception. The calm surface of the Pacific Ocean gives no hint of the vast descent below, yet the trench remains there continuously, shaped by forces operating over millions of years and inhabited by organisms adapted to conditions unlike those found anywhere else on Earth. As this long journey comes to an end, the image of the trench may remain not as a dramatic spectacle, but as a quiet presence beneath the ocean, a place where darkness and pressure define the environment and where life continues in forms shaped by the deepest conditions on the planet. Even after hours of imagined descent, the Mariana Trench remains larger than any single story, extending far beyond what has been described here and continuing its slow processes in silence. Somewhere far below the moving surface of the Pacific, Challenger Deep rests in permanent night, surrounded by waters that press inward from every direction with steady force. And there in the deepest darkness of the Earth's oceans, the slow rhythms of geology and biology continue uninterrupted, as they have for millions of years and as they will for millions more. And while the surface world moves quickly through days and seasons, the deepest ocean remains still and patient, holding within it one of the quietest environments on the planet, a place where the story of the Earth continues to unfold beyond the reach of light.